Single dad begged manager for expired baby food customer. Behind him whispers. Buy the whole store, a broke father's desperate plea turns a crowded grocery store silent until one voice shatters the cruelty. And what happens next changes an entire town and his life forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun did nothing to warm the biting March air as Eli Matthews trudged through the slushy streets of Mill Creek. His worn work boots, patched one too many times, leaked with every step. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the precious bundle wrapped against his chest. "Almost there, Maggie Bear," he whispered, adjusting the thin blanket around his daughter's tiny frame. Her small nose was red from the cold, and she snuffled softly against his jacket. The factory smokestacks loomed in the distance, silent now for 3 months. Eli remembered the day they'd called everyone into the break room. Temporary shutdown, they'd said. But temporary had stretched into weeks, then months, and now the gates were padlocked. He patted his pocket, feeling the wadded bills and loose change inside everything he had left in the world. $4.87. The number burned in his mind like a brand. It wasn't enough. It was never enough anymore. Help wanted signs had become rare treasures in Mill Creek, and Eli had chased everyone. The hardware store, the car wash, even the library, but each time, the answer was the same. "We'll keep your application on file." Maggie stirred against his chest, making the soft whimpering sounds that meant she was hungry. Again. The sound twisted his heart like a knife. "I know, baby girl. I know." The last of her formula had run out that morning. He'd stretched it as long as he could, making it thinner each time. But now, even the container's sides were scraped clean. The rent was 2 weeks overdue, and Mrs. Peterson, their landlady, had started leaving pointed notes about payment arrangements. Haven Mart's red brick building came into view around the corner. Eli had avoided it for days, too proud to face what he had to do. But Maggie's hungry cries had finally broken that pride into pieces. The automatic doors whooshed open, bringing a blast of warm air that made Maggie coo. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery made his empty stomach clench. Eli grabbed a shopping cart, its wheels squeaking with each turn. The sound seemed to echo his anxiety as he made his way through the store. Other shoppers pushed past with full carts, barely glancing at the thin man and his baby. A young mother in designer yoga pants breezed by, her cart loaded with organic baby food and premium diapers. Eli looked down at Maggie's worn sleeper, a hand-me-down from the church donation box, and swallowed hard. "Your mama would know what to do," he whispered to Maggie, thinking of Hannah. The memory of his wife's smile still had the power to both heal and hurt. The accident had taken her just weeks after Maggie was born, leaving him to figure out fatherhood alone. Eli steered toward the baby aisle, his feet feeling heavier with each step. The shelves stretched before him like a wall of impossible choices, rows of formula and baby food, each one costing more than he had in his pocket. His eyes searched desperately for the clearance section, where they sometimes put dented cans or nearly expired items. There had to be something, anything he could afford. Maggie shifted in her blanket, her face scrunching up in that way that meant tears were coming. "Shh, it's okay," he soothed, but his voice shook. It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. The clearance shelf was empty except for a few boxes of teething biscuits. Eli's hands trembled as he checked price tags on the regular shelves. Even the store-brand formula cost 3 times what he had. A stock boy walked by, pushing a dolly of boxes. "Excuse me," Eli called out, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you ever mark down formula when it's close to expiring?" The teenager shrugged. "You'd have to ask up front, but we usually just throw that stuff out." "Throw it out." The words echoed in Eli's head as he watched the boy walk away. Somewhere in this store, they were throwing away food his daughter could eat, while he stood here unable to buy it at full price. Maggie's whimpers turned into full cries now, sharp and insistent. Other shoppers turned to stare. Eli bounced her gently, but she was past being soothed by movement alone. "Please, sweetheart," he whispered, his throat tight. "Just hold on a little longer." He had to do something. Anything. With trembling fingers, he reached for the cheapest can of formula on the shelf, holding it like it was made of glass. The price tag mocked him. $16.99. The customer service desk loomed ahead like a judgment seat. Eli straightened his shoulders, tried to smooth his wrinkled jacket. Maggie's cries had subsided to hiccuping sobs against his chest. Each step felt like walking through deep water, but he forced himself forward. His last shred of dignity screamed at him to turn around, to walk out, to find another way, but Maggie's hunger was louder than his pride. He approached the counter, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The store manager, barely older than Eli himself, looked up from his phone with obvious annoyance. Eli cleared his throat. I was wondering. The words stuck like thorns. He forced them out anyway. Do you ever discount baby formula that's close to expiration? Even a little? The manager's eyes flicked from Eli's worn clothes to Maggie's patched sleeper and back. His lip curled slightly. That's not store policy. Formula's full price or nothing. Please, Eli said softly, hearing the desperation in his own voice. Even if it's damaged or… Look, buddy, the manager cut him off. There's a food bank over on 5th Street. We can't be giving handouts to everyone with a sad story. Heat rushed to Eli's face. Behind him, he could hear the line growing, feel the weight of stares on his back. Maggie stirred against him, sensing his distress. With fingers that felt numb, he pulled out his wadded bills and change, laying them on the counter. This is all I have, he said, his voice barely audible. Please, she's hungry. The manager sighed heavily, making a show of his inconvenience. Sir, I told you. Buy the whole store. A quiet voice interrupted from behind. The automatic doors of Haven Mart whooshed open, releasing a blast of warm air that made Maggie coo softly against Eli's chest. The familiar grocery store sounds washed over them, beeping scanners, squeaking cartwheels, and the low hum of fluorescent lights. Eli's worn boots squeaked against the polished floor as he made his way to the baby food aisle, trying to ignore the stares his threadbare jacket attracted. In the baby section, his calloused fingers traced over the jars, checking dates and prices. His heart sank as he realized even the regular prices were beyond his means. But there, on the bottom shelf, partially hidden behind newer stock, he spotted several dented jars marked with bright orange, expiring soon stickers. Maggie stirred against him, her tiny fist clutching his shirt. Just hold on, sweetheart, he murmured, gathering the jars carefully. Each one felt like lead in his hands, heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. The checkout line stretched long, filled with afternoon shoppers clutching their baskets of fresh produce and name-brand items. Eli bypassed them all, heading straight for the customer service counter where Trent Harper, the store manager, stood organizing papers. Eli cleared his throat softly. Excuse me, sir? Trent looked up, his crisp navy uniform shirt a stark contrast to Eli's faded flannel. The manager's name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his eyes narrowed at the sight of the dented jars. Those are expired, Trent said flatly, not bothering to lower his voice. I know, Eli replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I was wondering if I could buy them at half price? His fingers tightened around the jars. They're only a day past, and I've heard they're still good for months after. Trent's laugh cut through the air like a knife. Are you serious? He picked up one of the jars, holding it up as if it were evidence in a trial. We can't sell expired food. It's against store policy. His voice carried across the front of the store, drawing curious glances from nearby customers. Heat crept up Eli's neck. Please, he said, shifting Maggie in his arms. My little girl hasn't eaten properly since yesterday. I can't afford the regular price, but I can pay half. Look, buddy, Trent interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. I don't make the rules. These need to go in the trash. He emphasized the last word, causing several customers to turn and stare openly now. The whispers started. Eli could hear them clearly in the suddenly quiet store. Can't even afford baby food. Some people shouldn't have kids if they can't take care of them. Probably trying to scam the store. Eli felt each whispered judgment like a physical blow. Some customers pointedly looked away, suddenly fascinated by their shopping lists or the candy display. Others didn't bother hiding their disapproving stares. Maggie began to fuss, perhaps sensing her father's distress. Eli bounced her gently, trying to soothe her while maintaining what little dignity he had left. The few crumpled bills in his pocket felt like they were burning through the fabric. I understand, he managed to say, his voice rough. I'm sorry for wasting your time. He gathered the jars, preparing to return them to their shelf, each movement mechanical and stiff with shame. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher now, the store's warmth suffocating. Eli turned, his shoulders hunched, ready to retreat back into the cold March afternoon with his hungry daughter and empty hands. That's when he heard it, a soft voice, gentle as a spring breeze, cutting through the tension. Buy the whole store. The words hung in the air like a prayer. The rustling of shopping bags ceased. The whispers died. Even the beeping of the registers seemed to pause. Eli turned slowly, and there she stood, a silver-haired woman in her late 70s, her eyes kind and steady. She wore a simple church shawl draped over her shoulders, and though her clothes were modest, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Clara Jenkins looked at Eli with such compassion that he felt his throat tighten. Those 3 whispered words had stopped time itself, transforming the harsh fluorescent glare of Haven Mart into something almost sacred. The silence in Haven Mart hung thick as morning fog, pressing down on every shoulder and settling into every corner of the store. Every eye turned to Clara Jenkins, who stood straight despite her years, her weathered hands clasped gently in front of her worn cardigan. The fluorescent lights caught the silver in her hair like a halo, casting shadows that seemed to dance around her small frame. She looked like a grandmother from a Norman Rockwell painting, but her presence filled the space with something larger than her physical form. "Young man," she addressed Trent, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone used to being heard in church halls and community meetings. "Please, ring up those jars of baby food." She moved closer to the counter, her sensible shoes making soft sounds against the scuffed linoleum. Each step was deliberate, purposeful, and add some fresh formula too, the good kind. None of that watered-down nonsense. Trent blinked rapidly, his previous confidence wavering like a candle in the wind. The color drained from his cheeks as he realized this elderly woman wasn't backing down. "Ma'am, I just explained that we can't sell expired products for safety reasons, and company policy clearly states—" "I heard what you explained," Clara interrupted, not unkindly, but with the firmness of someone who had raised children and buried a husband. "Now, I'm explaining that you'll put it all on my account." She turned to Eli, who stood frozen like a deer in headlights, Maggie curled against his chest. The baby's small fist had wound itself into his jacket, her face peaceful despite the tension surrounding them. "Get yourself a cart, son. A proper one." Eli's throat worked, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried to find words that wouldn't come. Behind him, a teenage girl with purple streaks in her hair silently rolled an empty cart toward him, her phone partially hidden behind her designer purse, its camera light blinking red like a tiny beacon. She wasn't the only one recording now. Other phones had emerged from pockets and purses, their screens glowing in the harsh store lighting. "Mrs. Jenkins?" Trent tried again, his voice cracking slightly under the weight of all those watching eyes. "The expired food, it's against health department regulations, and if something happened, we'll go to waste otherwise." Clara finished, her words cutting through his excuses like a warm knife through butter. Her eyes, bright and clear as spring water, fixed on him with unwavering kindness. "The Lord doesn't waste, child, and neither should we." She placed her worn leather wallet on the counter with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the stillness. The wallet was old, its edges softened by years of use, held together with a rubber band. "Now, Eli here is going to do some proper shopping." Eli found his voice at last, though it came out rough and broken. "Ma'am, I can't accept this. I don't even know you. This is too much, too generous. I can't." "This isn't charity, son. It's grace." Clara's words fell soft but firm, like summer rain on parched earth. Her voice carried the wisdom of someone who had weathered many storms and learned the difference between pride and dignity. And grace isn't something we accept or reject. It simply is. She gestured to the aisles with a gentle sweep of her hand. "Go on now. Get what you and that beautiful baby need." The spell that had held the store in silence began to crack. An older woman in the next line, her gray hair pinned back in a neat bun, stepped forward, clutching a package of diapers. Her hands shook slightly as she offered them. "Here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she added them to Eli's cart. "My grandchildren outgrew this size last month. They're just sitting in my closet." A man in work, boots, and paint-stained jeans cleared his throat, the sound rough and honest. "The wipes are on sale in aisle 3, he offered, already heading that way with determined steps. "My wife swears by the lavender ones, says they're gentle on sensitive skin." The stillness broke like ice in spring, cracking and shifting as warmth spread through the store. One by one, customers began moving, their earlier discomfort melting into something beautiful. They offered suggestions, pointed out deals, shared wisdom, learned through their own struggles with parenthood and hard times. A young mother with 2 children clinging to her legs touched Eli's arm with gentle fingers. "The store-brand formula is just as good as the expensive ones," she said softly, her eyes bright with understanding. "And it'll stretch your dollar further. Trust me, I've been there." Eli stood rooted to the spot, tears blurring his vision as Clara gently took his elbow with hands that felt surprisingly strong. "Come on," she said, her voice warm as honey. "Let's get you both taken care of properly." They moved through the aisles like a small procession, a parade of quiet kindness that grew with each step. Clara led the way, adding items to the cart with quiet purpose and practiced knowledge. Fresh fruits that looked like jewels under the fluorescent lights. Vegetables still dewy from the produce mister. Bread that smelled like home. Milk so fresh it was cold to the touch, things Eli hadn't been able to afford in months, luxuries that had become impossible dreams. Maggie reached for a bright red apple with both tiny hands, and Clara placed it carefully in her grasp, watching as the baby's face lit up with wonder. "Babies know what they need," she said, smiling at the way Maggie's eyes reflected the apple's glossy surface. "Just like their fathers do, if they listen to their hearts instead of their fears." More customers joined their quiet parade, drawn by something they couldn't quite name but felt in their bones. A teenage boy with braces and kind eyes stacked jars of peanut butter in the cart. An elderly man with a cane added a bag of potatoes, then another. Each gift came with a nod, a smile, or a gentle pat on Maggie's back. The baby cooed at the attention, her innocent joy infectious and healing. "I don't deserve this," Eli whispered, his voice breaking as he watched the cart fill with more food than he'd seen in one place in months. "I'm nobody special. I'm just a guy who lost his job and can't even take care of his own daughter properly." Clara's hand found his arm again, her touch light but grounding. "None of us deserve grace," she said, her words carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "That's what makes it grace. The moment we think we deserve it, it becomes something else entirely." When they returned to the checkout, the cart was overflowing. Trent, his earlier arrogance dissolved like sugar in rain, began scanning items without a word. His movements were careful, reverent almost, as if he understood he was part of something larger than a simple transaction. The total climbed higher and higher, $30, $50, $75, but Clara stood calm and unmoved, her presence steady as a lighthouse in a storm. "Add some more formula," she instructed when the scanning was nearly done. "The premium kind, enough for a month, maybe two." When Eli started to protest, she squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Hush now, let someone else carry the weight for a while. That's what community is for." The teenage girl was still filming, her phone now held openly and proudly. Other phones had joined hers throughout the store, capturing not just a moment of kindness, but something that felt historic, a reminder of what people could be to each other when they chose love over indifference. The red recording lights blinked like stars in the artificial twilight of the store. Bags began to fill the counter not just with baby food and formula, but with real food, good food. Food that would fill Eli's empty cupboards and chase away the hollow ache of hunger. Food that would nourish Maggie's growing body and give Eli the strength to keep fighting for their future. Each item represented not just sustenance, but hope restored, dignity returned, and faith in humanity renewed. As the last bag was filled and the receipt printed with a soft mechanical whir, Clara turned to the watching crowd. "Thank you all," she said simply, her voice carrying to every corner of the store. "For remembering what community means, for being the hands and feet of love when it was needed most." Eli stood by the automatic doors, laden with bags that felt lighter than air despite their weight. Maggie secure in his arms. Tears streamed freely down his face now, but he didn't try to hide them. These weren't tears of shame anymore, but of something else, something that felt like the first warm breeze after a long, brutal winter. Something that felt like hope returning home. Clara followed him to the exit, her steps unhurried and peaceful. She stood in the doorway, framed by the late afternoon light that painted everything golden, and smiled softly as Eli turned one last time. The light caught the kindness in her eyes and made her seem almost ethereal, like an angel who had wandered into their ordinary Tuesday and transformed it into something sacred. "Thank you," he managed to say, though the words felt small and inadequate against the enormity of what had just happened. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you, or even begin to thank you properly." Maggie reached out one tiny hand toward Clara, her fingers spread wide with innocent trust, still clutching her red apple in the other. The teenager's phone captured it all, the baby's innocent gesture, Clara's gentle smile, and the tears on Eli's cheeks that caught the light like diamonds. In that moment, caught between the fluorescent glare of the store and the warm glow of the setting sun, something beautiful had been born from desperation, and grace had traveled farther than anyone could have imagined. The next morning, Eli woke to his phone vibrating so intensely it nearly danced off his bedside table. Maggie was still asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. She looked healthier already after a proper meal. He grabbed the phone, expecting another job rejection. Instead, the screen lit up with dozens of notifications, messages from friends he hadn't heard from in months, links to news articles, social media alerts, local angel saves single dad. One headline read. Below it was a video that had already gathered thousands of views. The shaky footage showed yesterday's scene at Haven Mart, Clara's quiet intervention, the community coming together, his own tear-streaked face as he left with bags of groceries. Eli sat on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. His chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and discomfort. He'd never wanted to be the center of attention, especially not like this. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a local news station asking for an interview. "No, thank you," he said quietly, declining the call. A knock at his apartment door made him jump. When he opened it, Mrs. Rodriguez from next door stood there with a steaming casserole dish. "For you and the little one," she said, pressing it into his hands before he could protest. "We're all so moved by what happened, that Clara Jenkins, she's something special." Throughout the morning, more neighbors appeared. Each brought food and kind words. Some he knew only by sight. Others, he'd never met at all. By noon, his small kitchen counter was crowded with dishes, lasagna, chicken soup, apple pie. Maggie woke happy, babbling as he fed her. The fresh formula Clara had bought made such a difference. No more watering it down to make it last longer. "We should thank her properly," he told Maggie as she gripped his finger. "What do you think?" She responded with a toothless grin. After lunch, Eli bundled Maggie up and walked the few blocks to Clara's address, given to him by one of the neighbors. Her house sat on a quiet street, lined with mature maple trees. It was a small white cottage with green shutters and a wraparound porch complete with an old wooden swing. The paint was peeling in places, but the flower beds showed careful attention. His knock was answered by soft footsteps. Clara opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of them. "Well, look who's here," she exclaimed, reaching for Maggie's little hand. Come in. I just put the kettle on." The inside of Clara's home felt like a warm hug. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, highlighting well-worn furniture and walls covered with old photographs. The air smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. "I hope we're not interrupting," Eli said, following her into a cozy kitchen. "Nonsense. I was hoping you'd stop by." Clara pulled out a chair at her small kitchen table. "Please sit. Would you like some tea? I have coffee too." "Tea would be nice, thank you." Clara busied herself with cups and saucers while Eli settled Maggie on his lap. She pulled a package of cookies from a ceramic jar decorated with painted roses. "My mother's recipe," she said, setting them on the table. "Nothing fancy, but they go well with tea." They sat together, the late morning sun warming the kitchen. Clara fussed over Maggie, who seemed fascinated by the elderly woman's bright smile. "I came to thank you properly," Eli began, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did yesterday, I don't know how to repay you." Clara waved her hand dismissively. "There's nothing to repay. I only did what I'd hoped someone would do for my boy, long ago." A shadow crossed her face briefly. Sometimes people just need a little grace. The whole town's talking about it. It's all over the internet too. "Oh my," Clara chuckled. "I wouldn't know about that. I can barely work my telephone." She reached for her tea but paused as a harsh cough overtook her. The sound was deep and rattling. "Are you all right?" Eli leaned forward concerned. "Just a tickle," she said, but her hand trembled as she lifted her cup. She tried to steady it with both hands, but Eli noticed the slight shake remained. Maggie reached for a cookie, her small fingers grasping at the air. Clara's face brightened again as she handed one to the baby. "She has your eyes," Clara observed. "Such a precious gift." "She's all I have," Eli admitted softly. "Sometimes all we have is exactly enough." Clara's voice was warm, but another cough interrupted her words. This one seemed to take more out of her. Eli watched with growing concern as she pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. When she pulled it away, her hands were definitely shaking. "Maybe you should see a doctor," he suggested gently. "Oh, don't you worry about me," Clara insisted, though her voice sounded weaker than before. "I've weathered worse storms than a little cough." They finished their tea, Clara telling stories about the town's history while Maggie played with her cookie. The morning light shifted to afternoon, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. When Eli stood to leave, Clara walked them to the door, one hand steadying herself against the wall. On the porch, she bent to kiss Maggie's forehead, then patted Eli's arm. "You come back any time," she said. "It's nice having a young family in the house again." But as she waved goodbye from her porch, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her hand trembled in mid-wave, and he heard that harsh cough follow them down the sidewalk. 2 days after the viral video, Eli pushed Maggie's stroller down Cedar Street, enjoying the spring breeze. The morning sun warmed his face as Maggie babbled happily, reaching for passing butterflies. He'd been meaning to thank Clara again, maybe offer to help around her house since she hadn't been feeling well. As they approached Clara's white cottage, raised voices cut through the peaceful morning. Eli slowed his pace, recognizing Clara's gentle tone, trying to calm someone who was clearly agitated. "Mother, this is absolutely ridiculous." A man's voice, sharp and cultured, echoed from the porch. "I had to find out about this from my secretary showing me a viral video. Do you have any idea how this looks?" Eli stopped at the edge of Clara's property. Through the white picket fence, he saw a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit pacing the porch. His perfectly polished shoes clicked against the wooden boards as he moved. This had to be Daniel Jenkins, Clara's son from Chicago that she sometimes mentioned with a mix of pride and sadness. Clara sat calmly in her porch rocker, hands folded in her lap. "Daniel, please lower your voice. The neighbors—" "The neighbors?" Daniel turned, throwing his hands up. "The whole internet is talking about how my elderly mother gave away hundreds of dollars to some stranger. Have you lost your mind?" Eli's chest tightened. He should walk away, but his feet wouldn't move. "That stranger has a name," Clara said firmly. "Eli Matthews is a good man who needed help." "A good man?" Daniel scoffed. "A good man wouldn't let an old woman empty her bank account for him. He's clearly taking advantage of you." Maggie chose that moment to squeal with delight at a passing bird. Daniel's head snapped toward them, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Eli from the video. "Well, speak of the devil." Daniel strode down the porch steps. "Here's our local celebrity now." Eli straightened his shoulders, though his insides churned. "Mr. Jenkins, Save it." Daniel cut him off, closing the distance between them. Up close, his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair made Eli feel even more aware of his worn jeans and second-hand jacket. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it stops now." "Daniel Jenkins!" Clara's voice carried surprising authority as she rose from her rocker. "You will not speak to him that way." "Mother, please." Daniel turned back to her. "Can't you see what's happening here? This man shows up with some sob story about his baby, and suddenly you're throwing money at him, and now it's all over social media?" "I didn't ask for any of that," Eli said quietly, his hand protective on Maggie's stroller. "I was just trying to feed my daughter." "Oh, that's rich." Daniel laughed bitterly, playing the devoted father card. "Tell me, where's her mother in all this?" The question hit Eli like a physical blow. Clara gasped, "Daniel!" "She died," Eli managed, his voice rough. "In a car accident, 8 months ago." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Surprise, maybe even a hint of regret, but it hardened quickly. "Convenient story." "It's the truth," Eli said. "Mr. Jenkins, I never meant to cause any trouble. Your mother showed me kindness when I was at my lowest point. I'll pay back every cent." "With what money?" Daniel demanded. "You're unemployed, right? Living off handouts?" Clara made her way down the porch steps, moving slower than usual. "That's enough, Daniel. You've forgotten what kindness looks like. What would your father say if he could see you now?" Daniel flinched as if she'd struck him. "Don't bring Dad into this." "Why not?" He understood what it meant to help others, to see past appearances and trust in God's guidance. "And look where that got him," Daniel snapped, then immediately looked stricken. Clara went very still, her face pale. Maggie began to fuss, picking up on the tension. Eli gently rocked the stroller, his heart aching for Clara, whose eyes had filled with tears. "I should go," Eli said softly. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm so sorry for any trouble I've caused." "You've caused nothing," Clara said firmly, though her voice wavered. "Daniel is the one who should be apologizing." But Daniel had turned away, his back rigid, as he stared at nothing. The morning sun caught his expensive watch, making it flash like a warning signal. "Please," Eli said, "I don't want to come between mother and son." "I'll stay away." "You'll do no such thing," Clara started, but another coughing fit seized her. She grabbed the porch railing for support. Daniel turned back quickly, concern breaking through his anger. "Mother, I'm fine." She waved him off, but her hand trembled. "Just a spring cold." Dark clouds were gathering overhead, matching the heaviness in Eli's chest. He knew he should leave, but watching Clara struggle made him want to help. When he took a step forward, though, Daniel's glare stopped him cold. "I think you've done enough," Daniel said coldly. "Stay away from my mother." Thunder rumbled in the distance. Eli looked at Clara, who was shaking her head, trying to speak through her coughs. But Daniel had already taken her arm, steering her toward the house. "Come on, Mother. You need to rest. And we need to talk about your checking account." Eli stood there a moment longer, watching as Clara cast one last apologetic look over her shoulder before Daniel helped her inside. The screen door closed with a decisive snap. His eyes burned as he turned the stroller around. Maggie reached up, patting his hand as if she sensed his distress. He lifted her out of the stroller, needing to hold her close, to feel her warm weight against his chest. "I'm sorry, sweet girl," he whispered into her soft hair. "I'm so sorry." The first fat raindrops began to fall as they walked away from Clara's house, each step feeling heavier than the last. All he'd wanted was to feed his daughter, to keep her healthy and safe. Now, his gratitude had brought trouble to the one person who'd shown them true kindness. The thunder grew louder, and Maggie whimpered against his shoulder. Eli held her tighter, hurrying down the street as the storm closed in, his heart as heavy as the clouds overhead. The knock on Eli's apartment door came just after 6 that evening. He had just finished feeding Maggie her dinner, and bits of mashed carrots still dotted her chin. Through the peephole, he saw Clara standing there, one hand pressed against the doorframe for support. "Mrs. Jenkins?" Eli quickly opened the door, worry creasing his forehead. "You shouldn't have climbed all these stairs." Clara smiled, though her face looked tired. "Third floor's nothing when you've got something important to say." She patted his arm. "And please, it's Clara." Eli ushered her inside, apologizing for the mess. The small apartment wasn't much, just a living room that doubled as his bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and Maggie's nursery. Toys scattered the worn carpet, and a pile of laundry sat half-folded on the couch. "Oh, don't fuss," Clara said, waving away his attempts to clear a space. "A home that looks lived in is a home filled with love." She made her way to the rocking chair near Maggie's playpen, lowering herself carefully. Maggie squealed at the sight of Clara, reaching up with sticky fingers. Clara beamed, reaching down to stroke the baby's cheek. "Hello, precious girl. Can I get you some tea?" Eli offered, already heading to the kitchen. "I have chamomile. That would be lovely." Clara watched him move about the kitchen, then cleared her throat. "Eli, I came to apologize for Daniel's behavior this morning. He's protective, sometimes too much so." Eli returned with 2 steaming mugs, setting one beside Clara. "You don't owe me any apologies, Mrs. Clara. I understand his concern." "No, you don't," Clara said firmly, "because you don't know the whole story." She took a sip of tea, then set it down. "But that's not why I'm here. I need to ask you a favor." Eli sat on the edge of the couch, watching her carefully. Something in her voice made him nervous. "I'm having a little health spell," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Nothing serious, mind you, but my doctor thinks I should take it easy for a few weeks. I was wondering if you might help out around my house? Just some basic upkeep. Mowing the lawn, maybe fixing that wobbly porch rail?" Eli straightened. "Of course, I'd be happy to help. You've done so much for us." "Now don't start that again," Clara interrupted with a gentle smile. "This isn't about paying back anything. I need the help and you need the work. Simple as that." Over the next few days, Eli fell into a routine. He'd arrive at Clara's house early, Maggie in tow, and tackle whatever needed doing. The spring weather cooperated, allowing him to catch up on yard work that had clearly been neglected. He trimmed overgrown bushes, pulled weeds from the flower beds, and mowed the patchy lawn into submission. Clara would sit on the porch, knitting needles clicking steadily while she watched Maggie play in her portable playpen. Sometimes she'd tell stories, her voice carrying across the yard as Eli worked. "Thomas, that was my husband. He always said a garden was God's way of teaching patience," she said one morning as Eli planted tomato seedlings. "We had our first real conversation in a garden, you know, back in '62 at a church social." She told him about Thomas, a gentle giant of a man who'd worked as a high school science teacher, how they'd fallen in love during the height of the civil rights movement, when such relationships weren't just frowned upon, they were dangerous. "We lost him in '68, Clara said softly, her knitting needles going still. "Some people couldn't accept change, couldn't accept love that looked different than what they expected." She smiled down at Maggie, who was stacking plastic blocks. "But hate never won in the end. Love always finds a way to bloom again." Eli found himself sharing too, as the days went by. He told her about Hannah, Maggie's mother, while he fixed the loose porch railing, how they'd met in high school, married young, dreamed big, how the factory job was supposed to be temporary, just until he could save enough for college. She was so excited about the baby, he said, hammering a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. She kept saying Maggie was our second chance, our fresh start. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. The night of the accident, I was supposed to pick her up from her sister's, but I worked late, trying to get extra hours. She took a cab instead. Clara didn't offer empty consolations. Instead, she got up slowly and brought him a glass of lemonade, her hand warm on his shoulder. One evening, after Eli had spent the afternoon making chicken soup in Clara's kitchen, his grandmother's recipe, he began packing up Maggie's things. The sun was setting, painting the kitchen walls in warm orange light. Clara sat at the table, enjoying the last of her soup. "You know," she said quietly, "God doesn't waste pain, Eli. He recycles it into purpose." Morning light painted golden streaks across Clara's garden, catching dewdrops that sparkled like tiny diamonds on spiderwebs strung between the rose bushes. Each thread glistened in the early sunshine, creating a delicate tapestry that seemed almost too beautiful to disturb. Eli Matthews arrived just as the sun crested the maple trees, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. He pushed his old wheelbarrow filled with gardening tools, a collection of well-worn implements he'd gathered over the years, each one telling its own story of hard work and determination. Maggie dozed peacefully in her carrier on his back, her tiny breaths warm and rhythmic against his neck, a comforting reminder of the precious life depending on him. Clara stood on her porch in a faded floral apron that had seen countless mornings just like this one. The fabric, soft with age and washing, bore the pale remnants of roses and forget-me-nots. She held her old brass watering can in both hands, the metal worn smooth by decades of faithful service. "Right on time?" she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper as she remained mindful of the sleeping baby. A smile creased her weathered face as she watched Eli approach. "The marigolds are ready for their new home, and this old garden's been waiting for some young hands to help bring it back to life." Eli carefully lifted Maggie's carrier from his shoulders, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid waking her. He set the carrier in a shaded spot on the porch, where Clara had thoughtfully arranged soft pillows and a worn quilt into a cozy nest. The porch boards, painted white years ago, but now showing their age, creaked gently under his footsteps. Together, they knelt in the soft earth, the rich soil dark and moist from Clara's careful tending. The morning air carried the crisp promise of spring, filled with the sweet scent of blooming lilacs and the earthy smell of freshly turned dirt. "Daddy always said marigolds were God's sunshine made into flowers," Clara mused, her voice carrying the warmth of cherished memory. She gently loosened a bright orange marigold from its plastic container, her movements careful and reverent. Her hands, though weathered with age and marked by liver spots, moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent a lifetime nurturing growing things. They're hardy little things, you know, bloom right through anything drought, frost, even when folks think they're done for, just like people sometimes. As they worked side by side, transplanting the bright orange and yellow flowers into their permanent homes, Clara began to hum an old hymn. The melody drifted through the morning air, sweet and haunting. Eli found himself humming along without thinking, surprised that he remembered the tune from childhood church services he'd attended with his grandmother so many years ago. The harmony of their voices seemed to bless the garden itself. "You've got a good voice," Clara said, glancing up from where she was patting down soil around a newly planted marigold. "Strong and true, just like my James did." Her voice softened at her husband's name, taking on a quality that spoke of deep love and deeper loss. She sat back on her heels, her gaze traveling beyond the garden to something only she could see, memories that lived in her heart like treasures locked away. "I'd love to hear about him, if you don't mind sharing," Eli said quietly, sensing the weight of memory that had settled over her like a gentle blanket. He continued working with the flowers, giving her space to speak or remain silent as she chose. Clara nodded slowly, reaching for her glass of fresh lemonade that sat on the porch steps. The ice clinked softly as she lifted it, and she took a small sip before beginning. "It was 1964, right here in Mill Creek. James taught at the high school mathematics and science. He was the first black teacher they'd hired in this town's history." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, filled with pride that time couldn't diminish. He believed with his whole heart that education could bridge any divide between people, no matter what color they were or where they came from. She paused, touching a bright marigold petal with gentle fingers. "Some folks didn't agree with that notion, I'm afraid." Eli's hands stilled in the rich dirt as Clara continued, her voice remaining steady but tender, with the weight of old pain. The morning breeze rustled through the maple leaves overhead, creating a soft whisper that seemed to echo her words. One night, after a school board meeting where he'd proposed integrating the advanced classes, giving every child the same chance at a good education, 3 men caught him in the parking lot. She took a deeper breath, her chest rising and falling as she gathered strength from somewhere deep within. They beat him so badly, he never woke up. Left him there in the cold October rain like he was nothing, like his dreams and hopes and beautiful mind meant nothing at all. "I'm so sorry," Eli whispered, his heart aching for this woman who had carried such pain with such grace. The words seemed inadequate, but they were all he had to offer. "For years after that, I carried such anger inside me," Clara said, her voice taking on a distant quality as she remembered those dark days. "It ate at me like poison, consuming everything good I tried to hold on to. I'd wake up every morning with rage in my heart, and I'd go to bed every night with bitterness on my tongue. Until one Sunday morning, when our pastor preached about Joseph in the Bible, telling his brothers who'd sold him into slavery, 'What you meant for evil, God meant for good.'" She looked directly at Eli now, her eyes bright with tears that spoke of healing rather than pain. "That's when I knew, really knew that I had to choose forgiveness, or the hatred would destroy me too. And I couldn't let them take that from me as well." Maggie stirred on the porch, making soft baby sounds that drifted through the morning air like tiny bells. Clara's face lit up with instant joy at the sound, and she smiled in Maggie's direction before turning back to Eli. "That's when I started the food bank with the little money James had saved for our future. Figured the best way to fight darkness was to spread as much light as possible, one person at a time." They worked in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of a robin, and the soft scraping of their hands in the soil. The marigolds seemed to glow more brightly as they found their places in Clara's garden, adding splashes of sunshine to the already beautiful space. Finally, Clara asked gently, "And what about you, son? What shadows are you carrying around in that tender heart of yours?" Eli's throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. He focused intently on patting soil around a marigold's delicate roots, but the words came anyway, pulled from the depths of his pain by Clara's gentle presence. "Hannah, my wife, she died in a car crash last year, February 14th actually, Valentine's Day." His voice grew thick with unshed tears. "I was supposed to pick her up from her night shift at the hospital, but I fell asleep on the couch after working a double shift myself. She tried driving home in that old car of ours, exhausted from 16 hours on her feet." His voice cracked completely, and he had to stop. The memory was still so fresh, so sharp it could cut him open without warning. "If I'd just stayed awake. If I'd just set an alarm. If I'd just been the husband she deserved." Clara's soil-covered hand covered his, her touch warm and grounding. "The enemy of peace is the word if, Eli. Trust me on that. I've spent enough years wrestling with that particular demon to know. But I keep thinking about all the ways I failed her." Failed Maggie. He gestured at their humble surroundings, taking in the simple garden and the small apartment building visible beyond the fence. "Look at us now. I couldn't even keep food on the table for my own daughter. What kind of father does that make me?" "You listen to me," Clara said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through loss and found wisdom on the other side. "That precious baby girl is healthy, loved, and safe, because her daddy would move heaven and earth for her. That's not failure. That's the purest kind of success there is. Hannah would be so proud of the man you've become, the father you are." A car engine rumbled nearby, growing louder as it approached. They both looked up to see Daniel's sleek black sedan crawling past the house, moving slowly enough that the driver could clearly see them working in the garden. Daniel didn't stop or wave, but Eli caught his unreadable expression through the tinted window, a mixture of suspicion and something else, something softer that he quickly masked. The car hesitated for just a moment before accelerating away, leaving only the scent of expensive leather and aftershave in its wake. Clara sighed deeply, watching until the sedan disappeared around the corner. "My boy's got his own shadows to wrestle with. 20 years in Chicago, building walls around his heart higher than any skyscraper. Sometimes the hardest hearts are just the most hurt ones, you know? He's forgotten that love isn't a weakness, it's the strongest thing there is." They finished planting the marigolds as the morning warmed and the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky. Each flower found its perfect spot in Clara's carefully planned garden, adding to the symphony of colors that would bloom throughout the summer. Maggie woke fully as they were cleaning up, her bright eyes taking in the world with the wonder that only babies possess. Clara insisted on holding her while Eli gathered the garden tools, and the baby reached for Clara's silver hair with tiny, grasping fingers, giggling as the strands sparkled like spun starlight in the growing sunshine. "You know what these flowers remind me of?" Clara asked, bouncing Maggie gently in her arms while the baby gurgled with delight. "That old story from the Bible about the widow's oil." She thought she had nothing left to give, nothing left to hope for. But God made what little she had multiply into more than she could ever imagine. Sometimes our hardest moments, our emptiest times, are just the beginning of our biggest blessings. The morning stretched on, filled with the kind of peaceful contentment that comes from simple work shared between friends. Birds sang in the maple trees, bees hummed among the flowers, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. It was the kind of moment that Hannah would have loved. Eli thought the kind of quiet beauty she had always been able to find even in their most difficult days. Later that night, in his small apartment above the corner market, Eli stood beside Maggie's crib in the soft glow of her nightlight. The room was tiny but clean, filled with the second-hand furniture and donated baby items that had become their humble sanctuary. He gently laid his sleeping daughter in her crib, taking care not to wake her as he arranged the soft pink blanket Clara had knitted around her tiny form. The moonlight streaming through the window caught the tears on his cheeks, making them shine like the dewdrops in Clara's garden that morning. His voice was barely a whisper in the quiet room, a prayer spoken to the darkness and the hope that lived somewhere beyond it. Maybe we'll be okay, baby girl. Maybe your mama's watching over us, and maybe Mrs. Clara's right about second chances. Maybe we're going to be just fine." The Mill Creek Diner's bell chimed as Eli pushed through the glass door. Maggie balanced on his hip, the familiar smell of coffee and hash browns wrapped around him like a warm blanket. He'd scraped together enough change for a cup of coffee, his first small luxury in weeks. "And did you see him there again yesterday?" Martha Wilson's voice carried from a corner booth. "Morning and night, like he owns the place now." Eli's hand froze halfway to the counter. Through the serving window's reflection, he could see 4 of the town's most prominent gossips huddled over their morning tea. "My Henry says Clara's been writing checks for groceries bigger than her usual," Betty Thompson added, stirring her cup with practiced disapproval. "Taking advantage of a sweet old lady's kindness, if you ask me." "Wouldn't surprise me," Martha replied. "First that scene at Haven Mart, now practically living at her house. Wonder what he's really after." Maggie squealed, drawing their attention. The women's faces shifted quickly from scandal to sugary smiles, but the damage was done. Eli's chest tightened as if someone had wrapped steel bands around it. "Morning, ladies," he managed, nodding politely as he turned toward the door. He couldn't bear their fake pleasantries, not after what he'd heard. "Eli?" Sarah, the young waitress, called after him. "Your coffee?" "Another time," he mumbled, pushing back into the morning air. His eyes burned as he strapped Maggie into her stroller. Would the town always see him this way, as some kind of opportunist? He walked quickly, head down, past the courthouse and toward Clara's street. The roses they'd planted yesterday bobbed in the breeze, as if waving him forward. Clara sat in her porch rocker, Bible open on her lap, as if she'd been expecting him. One look at his face and she knew. "Come sit, son." She patted the swing beside her. "Looks like you could use some peace this morning." Eli settled Maggie with her teething ring before sinking onto the swing. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. "Maybe I should stop coming around so much. People have been talking since Eve took that apple," Clara interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "And they'll keep right on talking till kingdom come. But that's not our business, is it?" "But your reputation." "My reputation?" Clara laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. "Child, I'm 78 years old. The only reputation I care about is the one I'll have when I meet my maker." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "Now, instead of worrying about wagging tongues, how about you help me with something important?" Before Eli could protest, Clara was getting up, moving with surprising speed for someone who'd been under the weather. She disappeared inside and returned with her car keys and a large notebook. "Time you saw what really matters in this town," she said, already heading for her old Buick. 20 minutes later, they pulled up behind a plain brick building on the edge of town. A simple sign read, "Mill Creek Community Pantry." Inside, Eli was amazed to find an operation running like clockwork. Volunteers, sorting donations, checking inventory, and filling boxes with careful precision. "Miss Clara," several voices called out in greeting. Eli noticed how everyone's faces lit up at her arrival, how they rushed to update her on their work. "This is my real life's work," Clara explained, as she showed him around. Started it after James died. Figured if I could turn grief into giving, maybe the pain would mean something. Throughout the morning, Eli watched Clara in her element. She knew every volunteer by name, remembered their children's ages, asked about sick relatives. When families came in for assistance, she treated them with such dignity that they left standing taller, as if they'd received not just food but renewed hope. A young boy, maybe 7, burst into tears when he saw the box of cereal in his family's package, his favorite brand that they hadn't been able to afford for months. Before Eli could think, he was kneeling beside the child. "Hey buddy," he said softly, pulling a clean tissue from his pocket. "You know what my daughter does when she's having a rough day? We look for 3 good things. Want to try?" The boy nodded, hiccuping slightly. "Well, looks like you've got that cereal, that's one." Eli started, smiling as the child's tears slowed. "And I see your mom over there looking at you with so much love. That's 2. What's your 3rd good thing?" My little sister drew me a picture this morning," the boy whispered, a slight smile breaking through. "There you go. 3 whole reasons to smile. Sometimes we just need to look a little closer to find them, right?" What neither of them noticed was Daniel Jenkins standing in the doorway, briefcase still in hand, watching the scene unfold. His father's watch showed 5:47 p.m. He'd meant to catch his mother alone, to discuss her reckless spending. Instead, he stood frozen, something shifting in his expression as he observed Eli with the child. The setting sun threw long shadows through the windows, painting everything in soft gold. In that moment, Daniel saw what his mother had recognized weeks ago, not an opportunist taking advantage, but a broken man helping others heal, even while carrying his own wound. The boy's mother gathered their box, mouthing thank you to Eli as they left. Only then did Eli notice Daniel's presence, his heart sinking at the thought of another confrontation. But Daniel remained motionless in the doorway, his face unreadable in the fading light. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Clara's front yard as Daniel's BMW pulled up to the curb. He sat for a moment, watching Eli perched on a ladder near the living room window, the sound of hammering mixed with a gentle humming that made Daniel's chest tighten. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. Eli's quiet voice carried the familiar melody across the yard. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel harder. That hymn, his father used to sing it every Sunday morning while making pancakes. The memory hit him like a physical blow, sending him back to mornings filled with the smell of coffee and his father's rich baritone. He stepped out of the car, his expensive loafers crunching on the gravel. Eli continued working, unaware of his presence, carefully fitting a new pane of glass into the old window frame. The autumn breeze carried more of the hymn's verses. "Was blind, but now I see. That was my father's favorite," Daniel said, his voice rougher than he intended. Eli startled slightly, nearly dropping his hammer. "Mr. Jenkins, I didn't hear you drive up." "Daniel," Clara's warm voice called from the doorway. She stood there in her flower print apron, a wooden spoon in hand. "What a wonderful surprise. You're just in time for dinner." "Mother, I just came to check on you. I'm not staying for—" "Nonsense," Clara cut him off with the gentle authority only mothers possess. "I made enough stew for an army, and my cornbread's almost done." She turned to Eli. "That window can wait, son. Come on down from there." Eli carefully descended the ladder, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. Daniel in his tailored suit, Eli in his work clothes. Inside, Clara's kitchen felt warm and inviting. The rich aroma of beef stew filled the air, and the golden cornbread cooling on the counter brought back more memories Daniel tried to push away. He watched as Eli naturally moved to help Clara, setting the table with the old blue plates Daniel remembered from childhood. "Here, let me get those bowls down for you," Eli offered, reaching the high shelf Clara couldn't quite manage anymore. "Always so helpful," Clara smiled, but her eyes were on Daniel. "Just like your father used to be." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Mother, please." They settled around the small kitchen table, steam rising from their bowls. Maggie sat in her borrowed high chair, happily mashing pieces of soft cornbread between her fingers. "Would you say grace, Daniel?" Clara asked. The request hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel hadn't said grace since before his father died. "I'd rather not." "I can," Eli started to offer, but Clara raised her hand. "Some things need to be said," she insisted, looking directly at Daniel. "Some wounds need air to heal. Is that what this is about?" Daniel's spoon clattered against his bowl. "Healing? Is that why you've practically adopted this stranger? To replace what you lost?" Eli shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Maybe I should go." "No," Clara said firmly. "You stay right where you are, Eli Matthews." She turned back to Daniel, her voice gentle but firm. "Nobody's replacing anyone, Daniel. Love doesn't work that way. It multiplies. It doesn't divide." "Love?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call letting some desperate man take advantage of your kindness? The whole town's talking about it, Mother. About how he's here all the time, doing things I should be doing." "Should be doing?" Clara's voice sharpened. "When was the last time you stayed long enough to notice what needed doing, Daniel?" The truth of her words stung. Daniel pushed back from the table, but Clara reached across and grabbed his hand. "Your father believed in sharing what we had," she said softly. "He believed kindness multiplies when shared. Remember how he'd invite strangers to Sunday dinner? Remember how he'd say grace travels farther than money ever will?" Daniel's throat felt tight. He did remember. He remembered everything, the warmth, the open door policy, the way his father would help anyone who asked. He remembered the day that kindness got his father killed. "Look at her." Clara nodded toward Maggie, who was now dozing in her high chair, cornbread crumbs on her cheeks. "Look at Eli. They're not replacing anyone. They're just proving your father was right. There's always room for more love at the table." Eli sat quietly, his eyes down, but his presence seemed to fill the room. He'd been silent through the exchange, bearing Daniel's accusations with a dignity that made them seem even more unfair. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. When they finished, Eli cleared the plates despite Clara's protests, washing them quickly and efficiently. Daniel watched him move around the kitchen, noting how he knew exactly where everything belonged. "I should go," Daniel finally said, standing. "Thank you for dinner, Mother." Clara hugged him tight, whispering something in his ear that made his eyes shine suspiciously bright. Eli nodded respectfully as Daniel passed, still not meeting his eyes. Outside, Daniel sat in his car, engine off, staring at the warm light spilling from his mother's windows. Through the glass, he could see Eli gently lifting a sleeping Maggie, while Clara fussed with a blanket. The scene blurred slightly, and Daniel realized his cheeks were wet. The hymn his father used to sing echoed in his mind as he watched them, unable to drive away just yet. The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon when Daniel pulled into the food bank's parking lot. His polished dress shoes felt out of place on the cracked concrete. He'd swapped his usual suit for jeans and a button-down shirt, but still felt overdressed compared to the other volunteers arriving in well-worn clothes. Eli was already there, stacking empty boxes near the loading dock. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face when he saw Daniel. For a moment, neither man spoke. "Need an extra pair of hands?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. Eli nodded, gesturing to the stack of boxes. "These need to be assembled. We're expecting a big delivery today." They worked in awkward silence, the sound of cardboard folding and tape stretching between them. Daniel struggled with his first few boxes, his corporate-trained hands unused to such manual labor. He noticed how Eli's movements were smooth and practiced, each box coming together perfectly. "Like this," Eli demonstrated, showing Daniel a better way to crease the corners. Their eyes met briefly, and Daniel saw none of the resentment he'd expected. The delivery truck arrived, bringing with it a flurry of activity. Other volunteers joined them, creating a human chain to unload canned goods, produce, and bread. Daniel found himself falling into rhythm with the group, passing boxes down the line. His expensive shirt grew damp with sweat, but he didn't mind. From the small radio in the corner, gospel music floated through the air. Daniel recognized the station, his mother's favorite. The familiar melodies seemed to ease the tension, like a mutual friend making conversation between strangers. "Your mother says you're good with numbers," Eli said as they sorted through donations. "We could use help organizing the inventory system." Daniel looked up from a box of cereal he was checking for expiration dates. "She talks about me? All the time." Eli smiled slightly. "Says you are always the smartest kid in class." Something warm and uncomfortable stirred in Daniel's chest. He busied himself with the cereal boxes, but found himself adding, "She probably didn't mention how I refused to visit for 3 Christmases in a row." "She didn't," Eli agreed quietly. "But she did say you send her flowers every Sunday." The morning wore on, and they moved to the soup kitchen area. Daniel watched as Eli greeted each person by name, remembering their stories and asking about their families. A young mother came through the line with 2 small children, and Daniel saw Eli slip an extra cookie onto each of their trays. "Here," Eli handed Daniel a ladle. "The secret is to give them a little extra when they look especially hungry." Daniel found himself relaxing as he served beside Eli. The soup splashed on his shirt, but he didn't flinch. When an elderly man told a joke about a preacher and a fisherman, Daniel surprised himself by laughing out loud, a genuine, unguarded sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. "You're good at this," Eli commented as they refilled the soup pot. "Your mother said you used to volunteer at your church's summer camp." "You and my mother seem to talk a lot," Daniel said, but there was no edge to his words anymore. "She's proud of you," Eli replied simply. "Even when she's worried, she's proud." They worked through lunch, taking turns, grabbing quick bites between tasks. Daniel found himself sharing stories about his childhood in Mill Creek, while Eli told him about learning handyman skills from his own father. The conversation flowed easier with their hands busy, as if the physical work created a bridge between their worlds. In the afternoon, they tackled the storage room organization. Daniel's business experience proved useful as he designed a simple but effective tracking system. Eli contributed practical insights about what families needed most and when certain items were in higher demand. "See these baby formula cans?" Eli pointed out. "They're like gold around here. Reminds me of when I first met your mother." Daniel paused in his labeling. "She told me about that day. Said she couldn't sleep that night, thinking about all the other fathers out there like you." "Your mother has a way of seeing people," Eli said softly. "Really seeing them." The sun was setting when they finally finished for the day. They stood in the parking lot, both dusty and tired but somehow lighter. Through the chain-link fence, they could see Clara sitting on her porch across the street, her familiar shawl wrapped around her shoulders as she watched them with a gentle smile. Daniel extended his hand. "Thank you. For today. And for being there for her." Eli clasped his hand firmly. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Their handshake was brief but sincere, and Clara's smile grew wider as she watched from her perch on the porch, looking every bit like someone who knew this moment would come all along. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Clara's front yard as Eli balanced on a stepladder, stringing twinkling lights between the porch posts. The warm spring breeze carried the scent of Clara's famous cornbread wafting from the kitchen windows. Behind him, Maggie sat contentedly in her playpen, babbling at a stuffed rabbit. "A little higher on the left, dear?" Clara called from her rocking chair, supervising the decorations with a knowing smile. "We want it to look just right for everyone." Eli adjusted the lights, his weathered hands working carefully with the delicate strands. "I think that's got it now," he said, stepping back to admire his work. The white lights created a gentle canopy that would sparkle once darkness fell. Inside, the dining room table had been extended with 2 card tables, covered in Clara's best tablecloths, a patchwork of cream and soft blue patterns. Mismatched chairs lined the sides, borrowed from neighbors in the church. Paper flowers that Clara had helped Maggie make decorated mason jars down the center. As the first guest arrived, Daniel appeared with several bags of ice and extra paper plates. He'd rolled up his sleeves, looking more relaxed than Eli had ever seen him. "Need any help in the kitchen, Mom?" he called out. Clara beamed at her son. "Just set those plates right there, honey. Eli's got everything under control with the green beans." The house slowly filled with volunteers from the food bank, retired school teachers, young couples, teenagers earning community service hours. The wooden floors creaked warmly under their feet as they moved about, carrying dishes and sharing greeting. Mrs. Rodriguez from the checkout line brought her famous enchiladas. Tom Baker, who stocked shelves, arrived with his wife and a chocolate cake. Even Trent, the store manager who'd once turned Eli away, showed up with a casserole and an awkward but genuine smile. The twinkling lights came to life as dusk settled, creating a magical glow over the gathering. Laughter and conversation mixed with the clinking of plates and forks. Eli watched as Clara moved through her guests like a quiet queen, touching shoulders, asking about family members, remembering every detail of their lives. Maggie worked her own kind of magic, toddling from person to person, accepting cuddles and cookies with equal enthusiasm. Her giggles punctuated the conversation like musical notes. Halfway through the meal, Daniel stood and gently tapped his glass with a spoon. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning to him. He cleared his throat, looking suddenly vulnerable in his casual clothes. I want to say something, if that's all right," he began, his voice softer than usual. "Most of you know my mother as the Angel of Mill Creek." He paused, smiling down at Clara. "What you might not know is that she's been that way my whole life, even when I was too blind to see it." Clara reached for his hand, her eyes glistening. "A few weeks ago I came back here angry," Daniel continued. "I thought I knew better than everyone else. I thought," he glanced at Eli, "I thought I was protecting something. Instead, I almost missed seeing the most beautiful thing, How my mother's kindness creates ripples that change lives. The room was silent now, hanging on his words. And Eli? Daniel turned fully toward him. I owe you an apology. You didn't just receive my mother's grace. You multiplied it. You showed me what I'd forgotten about home, about family, about serving others. Thank you for that. Eli nodded, emotion making it hard to speak. Maggie chose that moment to toddle over to Daniel, arms raised. He scooped her up, laughing as she patted his cheeks. This, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion, this is what I've prayed for. All of us here together like this. It's a glimpse of heaven, isn't it? The evening continued with dessert and coffee, stories and songs. Someone brought out a guitar, and old hymns floated through the open windows into the spring night. Maggie eventually curled up in Clara's lap, her small body going slack with sleep. Tiny snores mixing with the music. As the hours grew later, guests began to gather their empty dishes and say their goodbyes. Clara stood at the door, hugging each person, her joy evident in every word and gesture. But as the last car pulled away, Eli noticed her press one hand to her chest, a flash of pain crossing her face. She caught his concerned look and quickly dropped her hand, forcing a smile. Eli pretended not to see, but his heart grew heavy as he gathered Maggie's things. The twinkling lights still danced overhead, now witnesses to a secret neither of them was ready to speak aloud. The morning sun hadn't fully risen when Eli knocked on Clara's door, Maggie bundled in her carrier. No answer came. His stomach tightened as he used the spare key she'd given him weeks ago. Clara? He called out, stepping into the quiet house. The usual morning smell of coffee was absent. He found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her head resting on her arms. Her silver hair caught the dim light filtering through the curtains. Just resting my eyes a moment, she mumbled, lifting her head slowly. Her face was ashen, lips tinged slightly blue. Dark circles shadowed her usually bright eyes. Eli set Maggie's carrier down carefully. I'm taking you to the clinic, he said firmly, already reaching for her coat on the hook. Oh, don't fuss, Clara protested weakly, but her hands trembled as she tried to wave him off. I just need my morning coffee. No arguments, Eli said, helping her into the worn beige coat. Her shoulders felt fragile under his hands like bird bones. Can you walk to the car? Clara nodded, but her steps were unsteady. Eli supported her with one arm while carrying Maggie with the other. The morning air bit cold against their faces as they made their way to his old sedan. At the clinic, Dr. Sarah Chin frowned at Clara's vital signs. The examination room seemed too bright, too sterile for Clara's warm presence. Maggie dozed in her carrier while the doctor listened to Clara's heart through her stethoscope. Your heart condition has progressed significantly, doctor, Chin said gently. The arrhythmia is worse, and there's increased fluid buildup. We need to adjust your medication immediately, and I strongly recommend— Now, dear, Clara interrupted with a weak smile. Let's not get dramatic. The Lord knows when He's ready for me, and until then, I've got work to do. She patted the doctor's hand. Just give me whatever pills you think best, but I want to go home. Clara. Dr. Chin started, but something in Clara's eyes made her pause. Please, Clara said softly. Home is where I need to be. The door burst open and Daniel rushed in, still wearing his business suit, slightly disheveled. Mom? His face was drawn with worry. The clinic called my office. What happened? Your mother's heart is failing, Dr. Chin explained, while Clara clicked her tongue in disapproval. Such big words for such a small trouble, Clara said. Daniel, help me up. We're going home. Daniel looked helplessly between the doctor and his mother. Eli recognized the fear in his eyes, the same fear he'd felt watching his wife Hannah in her final moments. I'll stay with her, Eli offered quietly. Day and night if needed. Daniel's shoulders slumped in relief. I'll call Chicago, postpone my meetings. They brought Clara home as the morning grew warmer. She insisted on sitting in her garden while Eli worked the soil around her prized rose bushes. Maggie crawled on a blanket nearby, reaching for dandelion puffs. Throughout the day, Eli tended to both the garden and Clara. He brewed her favorite tea, adjusted her pillows, and sang old hymns she loved. Daniel worked from his laptop on the porch, making periodic calls to his office between checking on his mother. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Eli sang softly as he pruned the roses, his voice carrying on the afternoon breeze. That saved a wretch like me, Clara joined in, her voice weak but sure. The day passed in a gentle rhythm of care and quiet conversations. As evening approached, Clara called Eli to her side. The setting sun painted the garden in soft gold, and somewhere a mockingbird sang. Eli, she said, taking his rough hand in her soft one, I want you to know something. Her eyes were clear and bright despite her pallor. You're the son my soul was missing. God sent you to remind me what love looks like in action. Eli's throat tightened. Clara, Hush now, she said. Just know that you've given this old woman's heart more joy than sorrow could ever take away. Later, as night settled in and a light rain began to fall, Eli stepped onto the porch to call Dr. Chen. The porch lights cast a warm glow through the drizzle, and through the window, he could hear Clara's voice lifted in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for your grace that brings healing in so many ways. Thank you for sending angels in working boots and tired eyes. Thank you for showing me that love never fails. Dawn painted Mill Creek in gentle strokes of amber and rose. Dew sparkled on Clara's garden like scattered diamonds, and the morning air carried the sweet scent of her blooming roses. Birds called their morning songs from the old maple tree beside her house. Eli had dozed off in the armchair beside Clara's bed. Maggie curled against his chest. The creak of floorboards woke him. Clara stood by the window in her favorite blue dress, her silver hair caught in the early light. Clara! Eli scrambled up carefully, trying not to wake Maggie. You shouldn't be up. She turned to him with a serene smile. The Lord's given us such a beautiful morning. I want to sit on the porch and feel the Sunday. Let me help you, Eli said. But Clara was already moving slowly toward the door with surprising steadiness. Get Daniel first, she said softly. He's sleeping in the guest room. Eli found Daniel sprawled on the old twin bed, still in yesterday's wrinkled dress shirt. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Daniel. Eli touched his shoulder gently. Your mother's up. She wants to go to the porch. Daniel jolted awake, rubbing his face. Is she okay? Should we call the doctor? She seems peaceful, Eli said. Something in Clara's eyes told him this morning was different. They helped Clara settle into her favorite wooden rocker on the porch. The rising sun wrapped her in golden light as she gazed out at her garden. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes she'd hung years ago, their crystal notes dancing in the morning quiet. Eli, Clara said, would you make us some tea? The chamomile with honey, please. While Eli prepared the tea in the kitchen, he could hear Clara and Daniel talking softly through the screen door. Their words were too quiet to make out, but he heard Daniel laugh, a genuine, warm sound he'd never heard before. Maggie stirred in her carrier, making happy morning noises. Eli lifted her out, kissing her chubby cheeks. Let's go see Grandma Clara, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. When they returned to the porch, Daniel knelt beside his mother's rocker, holding her hand. Tears glistened in his eyes, but he was smiling. Eli set the tea tray on the small table and handed Clara her favorite china cup, the one with tiny painted violet. Thank you, dear, she said, taking a small sip. The morning light seemed to shine right through her, as if she were becoming part of it somehow. Clara reached out to touch Maggie's curls as Eli held her close. Such a precious little lamb, she murmured. The Lord's been so good to bring you both into my life. Mom, Daniel's voice cracked. Now, Clara patted his cheek. Don't you fret. I've been blessed with such peace this morning. She looked between the two men, her eyes bright with love. You've both given me that peace, you know. Seeing you here together, learning to be brothers in spirit, if not in blood. Eli sat on the porch step beside Daniel, their shoulders touching. Maggie cooed softly, reaching for Clara's outstretched finger. I want to thank you both, Clara continued, her voice growing softer but no less clear. Daniel, my precious boy, you finally opened your heart again. And Eli. She squeezed his hand. You showed us all what grace looks like in working boots. The wind chimes sang their crystal song. A morning dove called from somewhere nearby. Remember what I've always said, Clara whispered, her eyes drifting toward her beloved garden. Grace travels farther than money ever will. She took one more small breath, a gentle smile touching her lips. Then, as quietly as morning dew evaporating in sunlight, Clara Jenkins slipped away from them. For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the wind chimes and Maggie's soft babbling. Then Daniel made a sound, half sob, half cry, and crumpled forward. Eli caught him instinctively, still holding Maggie with one arm. Daniel's shoulders shook as he wept against Eli's chest. Tears streamed down Eli's own face as he held them both. The screen door creaked gently in the morning breeze. Clara's garden glowed in the golden light, as if every flower were trying to shine just for her. The wind chimes sang their farewell, crystal notes floating up into the perfect blue sky. Clara's teacup sat on the table, still warm, a single sip taken from its rim. The painted violets seemed to shimmer in the morning sun, catching the light just so, like tears, like diamonds, like grace made visible for one brief, beautiful moment. The autumn wind scattered golden leaves across the cemetery as mourners gathered under a cloudy sky. Nearly everyone in Mill Creek had come to say goodbye to Clara Jenkins. Black umbrellas dotted the landscape like scattered crows, though the rain had held off for now. Eli Matthews stood at the edge of the crowd, gently bouncing Maggie in his arms. Her tiny hand clutched his collar while he watched the proceedings from a respectful distance. The Reverend's words drifted over the assembled townspeople, speaking of Clara's dedication to serving others and her unwavering faith. She saw the divine in everyone, the Reverend said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Clara Jenkins lived as she believed that grace was not just a gift to receive, but a calling to share. Eli's throat tightened. Maggie made a soft cooing sound, and he pressed a kiss to her forehead, drawing comfort from her warmth. From their spot beneath an old oak tree, he could see Daniel Jenkins standing rigidly beside the polished casket, his corporate posture unchanged even in grief. After the service, people lingered to share memories of Clara. Their voices created a gentle murmur across the cemetery grounds, punctuated by occasional laughter as someone recalled her quick wit or generous spirit. Eli remained apart, knowing his presence might make some uncomfortable. He'd heard the whispers already about how much time he'd spent with Clara in her final days, about her surprising trust in a stranger. "Mr. Matthews?" A young lawyer in a crisp suit approached, clutching a leather portfolio. "Could you join us at the house? There are some matters to discuss." Eli's stomach clenched, but he nodded. "Of course." The gathering in Clara's living room felt surreal. Afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains she'd hung herself, casting delicate patterns across the worn hardwood floor. The lawyer sat at Clara's kitchen table, while Daniel paced near the window. Several church elders had been asked to stay as witnesses. "Before we begin," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses, "Mrs. Jenkins was very clear about her wishes." He removed several documents from his portfolio. "She made these arrangements just last week." Daniel stopped pacing, his shoulders tense. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. "To my son Daniel, I leave my savings and investments, with the hope that he'll remember money is meant to serve, not to rule." The lawyer paused, then continued. "The food bank and this house, however, I entrust to the care of Eli Matthews, who has shown me the very spirit of service I've always prayed to foster in our community." The silence that followed felt like glass about to shatter. Daniel's face flushed dark red. "This is ridiculous," he spat out. "He manipulated her, took advantage of her illness, her vulnerability." He turned to the church elders. "My mother wasn't thinking clearly. This man shows up out of nowhere, and suddenly he's inheriting her legacy?" Eli stood carefully, holding Maggie close. "Daniel, I never asked for—" "Save it." Daniel's voice rose sharply, making Maggie whimper. "You played her perfectly, didn't you? The humble single father, the grateful stranger. Tell me, how long did you plan this?" The church elders shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Peterson, who'd known Clara for 40 years, tried to intervene. "Now, Daniel, your mother was of sound mind. She was dying." Daniel's fist came down on the table, making the lawyer jump. "And he worked his way into her good graces while I was trying to protect her. Called me cruel for questioning his motives, and now we see why." Whispers started among the witnesses. Eli saw the doubt creeping into their expressions, the way they edged away from him, the trust he'd built, the connections he'd made, all of it crumbling under Daniel's grief-fueled accusations. That evening, after the lawyer and witnesses had gone, Eli stood in Clara's kitchen one last time. The house felt different now, heavy with judgment and suspicion. He'd spent the afternoon listening to Daniel's angry calls, watching people who'd smiled at him yesterday cross the street to avoid him today. His few belongings fit in 2 duffel bags. He'd packed Maggie's things first, her clothes, her favorite stuffed lamb, the blanket Clara had knitted for her. His own possessions were fewer. Some work clothes, a Bible Clara had given him, a photo of his late wife. The food bank keys felt heavy in his pocket. He placed them on Clara's kitchen counter, along with a note declining the inheritance. He couldn't bear to fight for it, to have his motives questioned, to see Clara's memory tainted by controversy. She taught him that grace was a gift freely given, not something to be defended or proven. Maggie dozed in her carrier as Eli took one last look around. The house still smelled faintly of Clara's potpourri. Moonlight spilled through the windows, touching the worn armchair where she'd told him stories of faith and forgiveness. His fingers traced the doorframe where she'd marked her son's height through the years. "We'll start over somewhere new," he whispered to Maggie, his voice thick with unshed tears. He lifted her carrier gently, shouldered his bags, and stepped onto the porch. The key turned in the lock with a final click, echoing in the quiet night. Behind him, Clara's porch swing creaked softly in the breeze, the same swing where she'd first asked him to help around the house, where she'd shared her wisdom and her heart. But now, it was time to go. To let her memory rest undisturbed by the pain of misunderstanding and doubt. The first light of dawn painted Mill Creek's small bus station in shades of gray and amber. Cold October air seeped through the drafty windows, making Eli Matthews pull his daughter's blanket a little tighter around her sleeping form. Maggie's peaceful breathing was the only sound in the nearly empty waiting room, her tiny chest rising and falling against his. He absently stroked her dark curls, so much like her mother's. While staring out at the awakening town, the memory of Clara's warm laughter echoed in his mind, as vivid as if she were sitting right beside him. Just 3 days ago, she had been alive, her eyes twinkling as she watched Maggie crawl across her living room floor. "Your daughter's got determination," Clara had said, chuckling, "just like her daddy." The memory made his throat tight. Eli reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the silver cross pendant Clara had given him last week. It was simple and worn smooth from years of faithful touches. "This belonged to my James," she had told him, pressing it into his palm. "Now it needs to protect another good man." The pendant caught the pale morning light, making the scratches in its surface more visible. Eli ran his thumb over the cross, remembering how Clara wore it every day, how she would touch it whenever she was deep in thought or prayer. A few seats away, an elderly couple whispered over their coffee cups. The woman glanced his way, then quickly looked down. Word had spread fast about Daniel's accusations at the funeral. The thought of it made Eli's stomach churn. "How could you manipulate a dying woman?" Daniel had demanded, waving Clara's will in the air like a battle flag. "Taking advantage of her kindness wasn't enough? You had to secure yourself a piece of her legacy too?" The words had cut deeper than Eli expected, not because they were true, but because they tainted everything pure and genuine about his friendship with Clara. She had been more than a benefactor. She had become family. Maggie stirred in his arms, making little snuffling noises. Eli adjusted her position, careful not to wake her. Their 2 small bags sat at his feet, containing everything they owned. It wasn't much. Some clothes, diapers, a few of Maggie's favorite toys, and the photo album Clara had made for them, filled with pictures from their time together. The station's ancient radiator clanked and hissed, struggling against the morning chill. Outside, the sky was turning from charcoal to pale blue, promising another beautiful autumn day. Eli watched a delivery truck rumble past the station's clouded windows, headed toward Main Street, where Clara's food bank stood. His heart ached thinking about all the people who depended on that place, just as he once had. "Last call for boarding." The bus driver's voice boomed through the waiting room. "Route 27 to Columbus, departing in 5 minutes. Eli's hands trembled as he gathered their bags. This was it, the moment to leave everything behind. Again. Start fresh somewhere new, where nobody knew their story, where Maggie could grow up without whispers following her, without people pointing at her father and muttering about how he'd taken advantage of a sweet old woman's kindness. He stood slowly, careful not to jostle Maggie. The weight of Clara's cross seemed to grow heavier against his chest. She had trusted him with so much, her friendship, her stories, her legacy. Walking away felt like betraying that trust, no matter how impossible staying seemed. The bus driver appeared in the doorway, checking tickets. 2 minutes, folks." Eli took one step toward the door, then stopped. Clara's voice echoed in his memory. "God doesn't waste pain, Eli. He recycles it into purpose." What purpose could there be in running away? In abandoning everything she had built? Everything she had believed in? The engine of the bus roared to life outside, its deep rumble filling the small station. Eli clutched the cross pendant tighter, feeling its edges press into his palm. Maggie shifted against his chest, one tiny hand curling into his shirt. Suddenly, tires screeched on pavement outside the station. A car door slammed with enough force to make the windows rattle. Eli turned just as the station's door burst open, letting in a blast of cold morning air. Daniel Jenkins stood in the doorway, chest heaving, holding a wrinkled envelope in his trembling hand. Daniel Jenkins burst through the station doors, his expensive coat disheveled and his normally perfect hair wild from the wind. His breath came in ragged gasps as he clutched a cream-colored envelope in his trembling hands. Without speaking, he dropped into the plastic seat beside Eli, the chair creaking under his sudden weight. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while Maggie stirred slightly in her sleep, Her tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. Outside, the bus idled, its exhaust creating ghostly shapes in the morning air. "I found this," Daniel finally managed between breaths, holding out the envelope. "In her Bible. It was marked for when I'm gone." Eli stared at the envelope. Clara's distinctive handwriting flowed across the front, elegant yet slightly shaky, just like her hands had been in those final days. His throat tightened as he recognized the careful way she'd written Daniel's name. "Read it," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. "Please." With careful movements, trying not to disturb Maggie, Eli broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The paper was thin and delicate, like Clara herself had been near the end. Her words, written in blue ink, filled both sides of the page. "My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, then I'm already home with your father, and you're probably angry and hurting. I know you too well, son. You're looking for someone to blame, and I'm afraid you might choose the wrong person. Let me tell you about Eli Matthews. That day in the grocery store, when I first saw him with little Maggie, I recognized something in his eyes. The same look you had after your father died. That terrible mixture of love and loss, of trying to be strong when your world has crumbled. But where you ran from the pain, Eli stayed to face it. Every day he helped me. I saw God's hand at work. While he fixed my roof, he mended my heart. While he tended my garden, he planted seeds of hope. When he thought I wasn't looking, I saw him slip extra food into boxes at the bank, even though his own cupboards were bare. You might think he took advantage of a foolish old woman, but the truth is, helping Eli gave me purpose again. After your father died, I chose forgiveness over bitterness, because that's what love demands of us. When you left for Chicago, I understood, but oh, how I missed you. Eli didn't replace you, Daniel. He reminded me of the son I raised, before the world taught you to measure everything by dollars and cents. The food bank isn't just about feeding people, it's about nourishing souls. Eli understands that. He knows that grace isn't a transaction, it's a gift meant to be passed on. That's why I'm entrusting it to both of you. Yes, both of you. Daniel, you have the business sense to make it grow. Eli has the heart to keep it true to its purpose. Together, you could help so many more people than I ever could alone. Remember when you were small, and you asked me why I gave away so much? I told you then what I'll tell you now. Love should never be measured by suspicion or wealth. It should be measured by how far it travels, how many lives it touches, how much light it brings to dark places. I've watched you both these past weeks. I've seen the walls between you starting to crack. You're more alike than either of you knows. Both wounded, both searching, both needing to forgive yourselves more than anyone else. Daniel, my precious boy, let go of your anger. It's time to come home, not just to Mill Creek, but to who you really are. And Eli, sweet Eli, who I know will read this too. Stop running. You've found your place. Maggie needs roots, and this community needs you both. This is my final wish, that you'll work together, trust each other, and continue what God started that day in Haven Mart. Not for my sake, but for all the others out there who need to see that grace is still alive in this world. With all my love, Mama. The letter trembled in Eli's hands as he finished reading. Beside him, Daniel's shoulders shook with silent sobs, his face buried in his hand. The morning sun had risen fully now, streaming through the station's grimy windows and catching the tears that fell freely down both men's cheeks. "She believed in you more than anyone," Daniel choked out, his voice raw with emotion. "More than me, more than herself." Eli reached over and gripped Daniel's hand firmly, Maggie still sleeping peacefully against his chest. The bus driver called out the final boarding call, but neither man moved. The morning sun painted Mill Creek streets in shades of gold as Daniel's luxury sedan wound through familiar neighborhoods. Eli sat in the passenger seat, Clara's letter carefully folded in his pocket, while Maggie dozed in her car seat. The silence between the men felt different now, no longer tense, but thoughtful. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom always said the sunrise was God's way of giving us fresh starts." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "I've been too proud to see what was right in front of me." They pulled up to Clara's cottage, where dew still sparkled on her beloved roses. The porch swing creaked gently in the morning breeze, as if welcoming them home. Eli's throat tightened at the sight. "I can't run the food bank alone," Eli admitted quietly. "I don't know the first thing about business." Daniel parked and turned to face him. "But you know people. You understand what they need." He managed a small smile. "And I know spreadsheets and profit margins. Maybe that's what Mom saw, how we could help each other." Inside the cottage, sunlight streamed through lace curtains Clara had hung decades ago. Daniel spread paperwork across the kitchen table, while Maggie played with wooden blocks on a quilt nearby. Together, they drafted plans to expand the food bank's reach. "We could renovate the old warehouse on Pine Street," Daniel suggested, sketching numbers on a legal pad. "Turn it into a proper distribution center. Add a kitchen for hot meals." Eli nodded, remembering how Clara would serve soup from her own stove. "Your mother always said dignity matters as much as food. People need a place where they feel welcome." The next Sunday, Reverend Thompson read Clara's letter to the congregation. Her words echoed through the hushed church. "In this town, I've seen both hatred and love, both judgment and grace. But grace always travels further, touching hearts that walls can't reach. I chose Eli to continue this work because he understands that giving isn't just about food. It's about seeing the divine in every person who walks through our doors." After the service, people lingered in the parking lot. Mrs. Peterson, who'd once whispered suspicions about Eli, was the first to step forward. "I'd like to volunteer," she said, wiping her eyes. "Clara was right about so many things." Others followed. By sunset, a sign-up sheet for volunteers was filled with familiar names. The town's carpenter offered to help with renovations. The high school shop class volunteered to build shelving. The quilting circle promised to make baby blankets for new mothers. Over the next weeks, the old warehouse transformed. Daniel hired contractors to repair the roof and install industrial kitchen equipment. Eli worked alongside volunteers to paint walls and arrange donations. The space slowly took shape, bright and welcoming, just as Clara would have wanted. Every morning, Eli arrived early to sort donations and stock shelves. He'd place Maggie in her playpen near the office, where she entertained visitors with her toothless grins. Daniel split his time between Chicago and Mill Creek, gradually shifting more of his business operations to his hometown. One afternoon, as Eli helped an elderly man carry groceries to his car, the man paused. "You know," he said, "I used to think Clara Jenkins was just a soft-hearted fool, but now I see she was building something bigger than all of us." The grand opening of Clara's cupboard drew crowds from 3 counties. The mayor cut a ribbon while Daniel and Eli stood side by side. Maggie perched on Eli's hip, the new sign gleamed above them, simple letters in Clara's favorite shade of blue. Inside, the space hummed with activity. Volunteers in matching aprons restocked shelves and helped visitors fill carts. The kitchen served hot meals at round tables where strangers became friends. A wall of photos near the entrance showed Clara throughout her years of service, her gentle smile watching over it all. Mrs. Peterson manned the welcome desk, greeting each person by name. The high school students who'd built the shelves now ran a homework help program in the corner. Even Trent, the grocery store manager who'd once mocked Eli, stopped by with a donation and an awkward but sincere apology. Daniel worked the room in his suit and tie, but his corporate polish had softened. He knelt to help a child reach a box of cereal, straightened up with a genuine smile. When he caught Eli's eye across the room, they shared a look of understanding. This was Clara's real legacy. Late afternoon sun streamed through the windows as workers mounted the finishing touch, a banner above the entrance reading "Clara's Cupboard, where grace grows." Maggie's delighted giggles echoed from her playpen as she watched the activity, drawing smiles from everyone nearby. The banner caught the light just right, its letters glowing like a promise kept. Eli picked up Maggie and held her close, remembering Clara's words from what felt like a lifetime ago. "This isn't charity, son, it's grace." Now he understood exactly what she'd meant. The weeks flowed like a gentle stream, each day bringing new life to Clara's vision. Clara's cupboard hummed with activity, transforming from a simple food bank into the beating heart of Mill Creek. The old building, once dim and dusty, now gleamed with fresh paint and possibility. Eli stood behind the counter one morning, watching elderly Mrs. Peterson teach a teenage volunteer how to properly sort canned goods. "The expiration dates matter, dear," she explained, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. "We want to give our families the very best." The floor creaked beneath his feet, the same boards where he'd once stood desperate and ashamed. Now, they felt like home. Maggie's playpen sat in the corner of his office, filled with donated toys and surrounded by the warmth of community love. She was growing faster than he could believe, her curious eyes taking in the constant flow of friendly faces. Daniel arrived each morning in his press suits, but by afternoon would roll up his sleeves to help unload delivery trucks. The transformation in him was remarkable. The hard edges of his corporate mask had softened into something genuine, something that reminded Eli of Clara's gentle strength. "These inventory sheets are a mess," Daniel said one day, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. "Mom would love this chaos, though. Remember how she used to say, 'Order is for angels, love is for humans'?" They finished together, sharing a knowing laugh. The challenges came in waves. The health department demanded new refrigeration units they could barely afford. Sometimes the shelves ran low, and Eli would pace at night, worried they'd have to turn people away. But solutions always seemed to appear, like the anonymous donor who provided industrial coolers, or the local farmers who started bringing fresh produce every Wednesday. "It's like she's still watching over us," whispered Sarah, one of their regular volunteers, after an unexpected grant approval came through. Eli just nodded, feeling the weight of Clara's cross pendant against his chest. The transformation wasn't just in the building or its services. Eli noticed it in himself, in the way he could now look people in the eye without shame, in how he learned to accept help as gracefully as he gave it. His old wounds began to heal as he helped others carry their burdens. Daniel's change was even more profound. Each Sunday, he'd slip quietly into the back pew of Clara's church, sometimes with tears running down his cheeks during the hymns his father once sang. After services, he'd linger, talking with elderly parishioners who remembered him as a boy. "I forgot what it felt like," Daniel admitted one evening as they closed up shop, "to be part of something bigger than myself, to believe in grace again." They developed a rhythm, these two unlikely partners. Eli handled the day-to-day operations, his natural empathy, drawing people in, making them feel safe enough to ask for help. Daniel's business acumen kept them afloat, his connections opening doors they hadn't known existed. The community responded in kind. Children started dropping by after school to do homework and help stock shelves. Local restaurants donated leftover food. The high school shop class built new shelving units. What had begun as one woman's act of kindness had bloomed into a tapestry of interconnected lives. "Your mama would be mighty proud," Pastor Roberts said one day, watching Daniel teach a young mother how to create a household budget. Daniel ducked his head, but Eli caught the smile he couldn't quite hide. Even the town gossips found better things to talk about. The same people who had once whispered about Eli's desperation now spoke of his dedication. They watched him bounce Maggie on his hip while coordinating volunteer schedules, saw how he remembered everyone's names and stories, noticed how he always made sure the elderly got rides home with their groceries. The evening light slanted golden through the windows as Eli finished closing up one night. The day's work was done. Shelves restocked, floors swept, tomorrow's donations sorted. Maggie had fallen asleep in her playpen, clutching the stuffed bear Clara had given her months ago. In the quiet, Eli's footsteps echoed as he walked to the front of the store. Clara's portrait hung there, her kind eyes watching over the space she'd helped create. Someone had placed fresh flowers beneath it that morning. They did that often now, these people whose lives she'd touched. He struck a match and lit the small candle they kept there, its flames steady in the growing darkness. The light caught the edges of her smile, making it seem almost alive. "We did it, ma'am," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Daniel's restored farmhouse as Eli pulled into the gravel driveway, Maggie cooing softly in her car seat. The two-story white colonial stood proud against the autumn sky, its wraparound porch freshly painted, rocking chairs swaying gently in the October breeze. Eli lifted Maggie from her seat, adjusting her little pink sweater. "Look at that pretty house, sweet girl," he whispered, kissing her forehead. The screen door creaked open, and Daniel emerged, wearing jeans and a casual button-down shirt, a far cry from his usual business attire. "You made it," Daniel called out, his voice warm. He jogged down the porch steps, reaching for Maggie. "There's my favorite girl." The baby squealed with delight as Daniel swept her up, making airplane noises. Eli smiled, still amazed at how naturally the stern businessman had transformed into a doting uncle figure. "Thanks for having us over," he said, following Daniel up the steps. Inside, the house smelled of pot roast and fresh bread. Family photos lined the walls, younger versions of Clara and her husband Thomas, Daniel as a boy, moments frozen in time. Eli paused at a black and white wedding photo, struck by Clara's radiant smile and Thomas's proud stance. "Dad took forever to get that tie straight," Daniel said softly, coming up beside him. "Mom always said he was more nervous than she was that day." He cleared his throat. "Come on, dinner's almost ready. I've got Maggie's high chair all set up." The kitchen was warm and inviting, with modern appliances contrasting against the original hardwood floors. A pot bubbled on the stove, while fresh rolls waited in a basket on the counter. Daniel had set the table with care, proper plates, cloth napkins, even a small vase of wildflowers that reminded Eli of Clara's garden. "This is incredible," Eli said, helping Daniel settle Maggie into her high chair. "I didn't know you could cook." Daniel laughed, a touch of sadness in his eyes. "Mom taught me, actually. Before I left for college, I just forgot for a while. Seemed easier to order takeout in Chicago." He served the pot roast, the meat falling apart tender. "It's her recipe." They settled in to eat, taking turns feeding Maggie soft pieces of potato and carrot. The conversation flowed easily at first. Talk of the food bank's latest projects, funny stories about Maggie's attempts at walking, memories of Clara's legendary Sunday dinners. As the meal wound down, Daniel rose and returned with 2 glasses of sweet tea, Clara's special recipe. The silence that felt heavy with unspoken words. "I've been wanting to tell you something," Daniel said finally, his fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on his glass. "About why I was so harsh when I first came back." Eli leaned forward, giving Daniel his full attention. Maggie played contentedly with her spoon, babbling to herself. "When Dad died," Daniel continued, his voice thick, "I was 17, old enough to understand hate and violence, young enough to let it poison me." He took a shaky breath. "Mom chose forgiveness. She chose love. But I couldn't. I ran away to college, buried myself in work, convinced myself I was protecting her by staying away." Tears gathered in Daniel's eyes. "I abandoned her, Eli, my own mother, because I couldn't bear to see how she could still love a world that took Dad from us." He wiped roughly at his face. "When I saw that video of her helping you, it wasn't just guilt I felt. It was shame, because she never stopped being who she was, never stopped showing grace, while I turned my heart to stone." Eli's own eyes burned. "I understand more than you know," he said quietly. "After Hannah, my wife, died, I blame myself. Still do, some days." His voice cracked. "She wanted ice cream, middle of winter, crazy craving. I should have waited until morning, but I went out. Roads were icy." "Eli." Daniel reached across the table, gripping his arm. "That wasn't your fault." "Wasn't yours either," Eli replied, meeting Daniel's gaze. "Losing your dad, pulling away from your mom. Grief does things to us. Makes us build walls we think will protect us." "But Mom knew better," Daniel said softly. "She knew walls don't protect, they imprison." He looked around the kitchen, at the home his parents had built with love. "You know what finally broke through my walls? Watching you with her. Seeing how you listened to her stories, helped in her garden, treated her with such genuine respect. You gave her back the son I should have been." "No." Eli shook his head firmly. "I didn't replace you, Daniel. I couldn't. She loved you fiercely, proudly. Every day we worked together, she'd tell me about your achievements, your kindness as a child, how much of your father's strength she saw in you." Daniel's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I wasted so much time." "She knew why," Eli said gently. "And she forgave you long before you asked. That was Clara's gift. Seeing past our broken pieces to who we could become." Maggie chose that moment to drop her spoon with a clatter, her sweet giggle cutting through the heavy emotion. Both men laughed, wiping their eyes. Daniel picked up his glass of sweet tea, holding it out. "To Clara," he said, voice strong despite his tears. "The bridge between 2 broken men." Eli raised his glass, touching it to Daniel's. "To Clara," he echoed, "who taught us grace travels farther than pain." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping the sweet tea that tasted of summer and memories and healing. Through the kitchen window, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, the same colors that had filled Clara's garden. In her high chair, Maggie hummed a nonsense tune, her small hands reaching for both men who now shared more than just a borrowed mother's love. The September morning dawned bright and crisp over Mill Creek's town square. Red and gold banners fluttered between lampposts, proclaiming Community Spirit Festival in bold letters. Volunteers bustled about, setting up folding chairs and hanging streamers, while the aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods wafted from food trucks lining Main Street. Outside Clara's cupboard, now expanded into the neighboring storefront, Eli adjusted Maggie's little yellow dress. At 18 months old, she toddled confidently beside him, clutching his finger with one hand and waving at passers-by with the other. "There's our star speaker," Mrs. Peterson called out, hurrying over with a clipboard. Her gray hair was tucked beneath a volunteer cap bearing Clara's cupboard's new logo, a simple heart with open doors. "The stage is all set up, Eli," We're expecting quite a turnout." Eli's stomach fluttered. Public speaking had never been his strong suit, but when the town council had asked him to give the keynote address at their first annual Community Spirit Festival, he couldn't refuse. This celebration represented everything Clara had believed in, the power of kindness to transform lives. "Uncle Danny!" Maggie squealed, spotting Daniel emerging from his car. She broke free from Eli's grip and wobbled toward him as fast as her little legs could carry her. Daniel scooped her up, his expensive suit collecting toddler fingerprints. "There's my favorite girl." He'd grown comfortable in his role as honorary uncle, spending weekends teaching Maggie to garden in Clara's old plots. The vegetables they grew now helped stock the cupboard shelves. "Nervous?" Daniel asked, falling into step beside Eli as they walked toward the stage. "Terrified," Eli admitted with a small laugh. "Your mother made this kind of thing look easy." "She'd be proud of you," Daniel said softly. "Of all of this?" He gestured to the growing crowd. Former recipients of Clara's Cupboard's help now wore volunteer badges, greeting newcomers with warm smiles and fresh bread. The Martinez family, who'd relied on food assistance last winter, now ran cooking classes, teaching budget-friendly meals. Old Mr. Wilson, once too proud to accept help, had turned his carpentry skills into a job training program for unemployed workers. The Thompson teens, whose mother had struggled after their father's death, now organized a weekend backpack program, ensuring no child went hungry. Sarah Chin, the local newspaper editor, approached with her camera. "Mind if I get a few shots?" The story of Clara's Cupboard has inspired similar programs in 3 neighboring counties. Eli nodded, watching the community he'd once feared would reject him. Instead, they'd become family, the kind Clara had always known they could be. Mayor Thompson took the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please take your seats, we're about to begin our ceremony." The crowd settled into rows of chairs, children sitting cross-legged on blankets spread across the grass. Daniel gave Eli's shoulder a squeeze before finding his place in the front row. Maggie perched on his knee. "1 year ago," the mayor began, "our town was struggling. The factory closure had left many families wondering how they'd make it through another week. But then something extraordinary happened. A simple act of kindness in a grocery store sparked a movement." Eli listened as she recounted Clara's story, his eyes misting at the mention of her name. The crowd nodded, many wiping away tears of their own. Today, Clara's Cupboard serves over 200 families each month. But more than that, it's restored our sense of community. And now, I'd like to introduce the man who helped make Clara's vision a reality. Eli Matthews. The applause felt warm, encouraging. Eli approached the podium, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded his notes. But when he looked out at the sea of familiar faces, he set the paper aside. Clara had always spoken from the heart. "A year ago, I stood in a checkout line holding expired baby food," he began, his voice steady. "I was a man who'd lost everything, my job, my wife, my hope. But then I met Clara Jenkins, and she taught me that dignity isn't measured by what's in your wallet." He spoke of grace, not the kind that demands perfection, but the kind that sees worth in everyone. He shared stories of volunteers who'd become friends, of strangers who'd become family, of how faith grows stronger when tested by hardship. "Clara used to say that grace travels farther than money ever will," Eli continued. "I didn't understand what she meant until I saw how one person's kindness could ripple through an entire community. Each of you here today is proof of that ripple effect." Tissues appeared throughout the crowd. Daniel dabbed at his eyes while bouncing a squirming Maggie. "We've turned an old grocery store into something sacred, not because of the food on our shelves, but because of the love we share. Every person who walks through those doors is treated with respect, whether they're giving or receiving. That's what Clara taught us, that we're all worthy of dignity, all capable of giving, all in need of grace." The crowd murmured in agreement. Mrs. Peterson openly wept. "So today, as we celebrate our community spirit, remember this. Hope isn't found in grand gestures or perfect solutions. It's found in small acts of kindness, in choosing to see the best in each other, in believing that together we can make tomorrow better than today." The applause started slowly, then swelled. Daniel stood, still holding Maggie, who clapped enthusiastically, though she didn't quite understand why. Eli smiled, gesturing for Daniel to bring her up. "And this little one," he said as Daniel passed Maggie to him, "she's our daily reminder that love multiplies when shared." Clara knew that. She believed in second chances, in fresh starts, in the power of community to heal broken hearts. He lifted Maggie higher, and she waved at the crowd with both hands, giggling as everyone waved back. The applause grew louder, people rising to their feet. In that moment, Eli felt Clara's presence, in the autumn breeze, in the laughter of children, in the tears of joy on familiar faces. Snow fell in gentle swirls outside Clara's cottage, each delicate flake catching the golden glow of twinkling lights strung along the wraparound porch. The old house stood completely transformed, its white clapboard siding freshly painted, the forest green shutters lovingly restored to their original beauty, and warm amber lights spilling like honey from every frost-kissed window. The attached pantry, now proudly bearing the hand-carved wooden sign reading Clara's Cupboard, had doubled in size thanks to Daniel's careful renovation work throughout the long summer months. New shelving lined the walls, and gleaming refrigeration units hummed quietly in the background. Inside the main house, the rich scent of cinnamon bark and fresh pine needles wrapped around dozens of guests, filling every corner of the cozy living room. Elderly couples settled into plush, cushioned chairs that Daniel had reupholstered himself, while children sprawled contentedly on thick braided rugs near the crackling stone fireplace. The mantelpiece was draped with garland and dotted with battery-operated candles that cast dancing shadows on the cream-colored walls. In the kitchen, Eli stirred a massive pot of his now famous chicken and dumplings, Clara's own recipe, written in her careful, flowing cursive on a yellowed index card that he'd laminated to preserve. Steam rose from the pot, carrying the comforting aroma of herbs and tender vegetables throughout the house. "Need any help in here?" Daniel appeared beside him, rolling up the sleeves of his charcoal cable-knit sweater. Gone forever was the crisp business suit and silk tie he'd worn when he first stormed back to Mill Creek all those months ago. His hair was slightly mussed, his cheeks pink from helping guests with their coats, and his smile came easily now. His shoulders finally relaxed after years of carrying invisible burdens. "Could definitely use another hand with these buttermilk biscuits," Eli said, nodding toward the golden dough waiting on the flour-dusted counter. Clara always said the secret was not to overwork them. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after months of patient healing and deep understanding. Their movements were synchronized now, like brothers who'd grown up together instead of two men who'd met in anger and suspicion. Through the wide kitchen doorway, they could see little Maggie toddling confidently between guests, her red velvet dress with its white lace collar making her look like a tiny Mrs. Claus. Her dark curls bounced with each determined step, and her infectious giggle drew smiles from everyone she passed. Mrs. Peterson, their oldest regular at the food bank and a widow of 40 years, scooped Maggie up for a cuddle, her weathered face lighting up with pure joy. "Oh, you sweet little angel," she cooed, settling into her favorite rocking chair with a child in her lap. "You know, I keep thinking about last Christmas," Daniel said quietly, his hands working to cut perfect circles in the soft dough. "I was still holed up in my Chicago penthouse, buried under spreadsheets and endless conference calls, alone with my takeout dinner and my pride. And I was." Eli paused, his throat tightening with the memory. "I was sitting in that drafty apartment, wondering how I'd manage to feed her through another cold winter, counting pennies and praying for miracles." Daniel reached over and squeezed his shoulder firmly. "Just look at us now, brother." The formal dining room had been completely transformed for the occasion. 3 mismatched tables had been pushed together and covered in crisp white tablecloths that Mrs. Henderson from the church had donated. The makeshift banquet table groaned under the generous weight of dozens of donated dishes. Golden brown turkey, honey-glazed ham, creamy sweet potato casserole, traditional green bean casserole topped with crispy onions, and no fewer than 7 different kinds of pie filled every available inch of space. Homemade dinner rolls sat warm in wicker baskets, and mason jars filled with Clara's famous apple butter dotted the table like amber jewels. No one who came to Clara's house would leave hungry tonight. That had always been her promise, and Eli and Daniel were determined to keep it. As the winter evening settled deeper around them, Pastor Mike rose slowly from his seat at the head of the table. His kind face was illuminated by the soft glow of pillar candles, and his voice carried the warmth of genuine gratitude. "Dear Lord, we gather here tonight with hearts full of thanksgiving. We thank you for bringing this precious community together, for showing us through Clara's shining example that love multiplies when it's freely shared, and for teaching us the profound truth that real wealth isn't measured in our bank accounts, but in the unbreakable bonds we build with each other. Amen." The room echoed in unison, voices ranging from children's high whispers to the deep baritones of the older men. Plates were filled to overflowing. Heartwarming stories were shared across generations, and gentle laughter rippled through the house like the sweetest music. Old Mister, Johnson, who'd lost his beloved wife in the spring after 53 years of marriage, found himself completely surrounded by eager children begging to hear tales of Christmas celebrations from his boyhood. His eyes, which had been dim with grief for months, sparkled once again as he spun stories of horse-drawn sleighs and handmade toys. Sarah from the hardware store, recently divorced and struggling to make ends meet while raising 2 young boys alone, relaxed for the first time in months as neighbors passed her generous seconds and thirds, making sure her plate never stayed empty. Her oldest son, Tommy, sat mesmerized by stories from the volunteer firefighters, while her younger boy, Kevin, curled up contentedly in the lap of Mrs. Chen from the grocery store. After the last bite of pumpkin pie had been savored, someone discovered Clara's restored upright piano tucked in the corner of the living room. Soon, gentle Christmas carols filled the air as voices joined in harmony. Some were scratchy with age, others pure and clear as church bells, but all blended together in perfect unity. Eli watched with a full heart as Daniel patiently taught Maggie to jingle a tiny silver bell in time with Silent Night, her chubby fingers gripping the handle with fierce concentration. The Christmas tree, standing tall and proud in the corner by the curved staircase, sparkled with hundreds of warm white lights and dozens of handmade ornaments. Each decoration told its own precious story. Paper angels crafted by food bank volunteers during their evening shifts, painted pine cones collected and decorated by the church youth group, and delicate wooden crosses that Clara herself had crocheted years ago during her quiet evening hours. Maggie broke away from Daniel's gentle grasp and wobbled with determination toward the magnificent tree, her little face absolutely glowing with childlike wonder. She reached up on her tiptoes for a particular wooden ornament hanging at her eye level. A simple circle painted pristine white with bold black letters reading "Grace Travels Farther." Clara had lovingly commissioned dozens of them from the high school woodshop class last spring, just weeks before the Lord called her home. "Data!" Maggie called out triumphantly, holding the ornament up like a precious treasure. "Pretty." "Yes, baby girl," Eli said softly, scooping her warm little body up into his arms. "Very, very pretty." He held her close against his chest, breathing in the sweet, innocent smell of baby shampoo in her soft curls. Above the crackling stone fireplace hung Clara's favorite photograph in an ornate silver frame that Daniel had polished until it gleamed. Her wise eyes seemed to twinkle with pure joy at the beautiful scene spread below. The house overflowing with love and fellowship, filled with laughter and belonging, just exactly as she'd always dreamed it would be. Eli's grateful gaze met Daniel's across the crowded, warm room. They shared a knowing look that spoke volumes, both men remembering her final whispered words about grace traveling further than money ever could. How perfectly, beautifully right she'd been. The living proof was all around them, in the lovingly restored house that welcomed everyone with open arms, in the expanded food bank that now fed hundreds of families each week, and in the miraculous healing of 2 broken, wounded men who'd somehow become brothers in all but blood. The snow continued its gentle dance outside, coating the sleeping town of Mill Creek in a blanket of pristine white that sparkled under the streetlights. Inside Clara's house, warmth and fellowship and unconditional love filled every corner of her lasting legacy. Little Maggie snuggled deeper against Eli's chest, her eyelids growing heavy as the soft, sweet carols continued to float through the rooms like a lullaby. Looking up at Clara's eternally smiling face in the silver-frame photograph, Eli whispered with a voice thick with emotion, "Merry Christmas, Mama Clara. Thank you for showing us what grace really looks like." The spring sunrise painted Mill Creek in hues of gold and pink, casting long shadows across the community garden that now flourished where Clara's simple flower bed once stood. Raised wooden beds lined neat gravel paths, their soil rich and dark from months of careful tending. Morning dew sparkled on tender seedlings and early blooms, making the whole garden shimmer like it was decorated with tiny diamonds. The air carried the fresh scent of earth and growing things, mixed with the sweet fragrance of Clara's heirloom roses that still bloomed along the old fence line. Eli Matthews stood at the garden gate, breathing in the sweet morning air. The wooden sign beside him read, "Clara's Community Garden, Where Grace Grows," painted in cheerful yellow letters by the high school art class. At 18 months old, Maggie rode securely in the baby carrier on his back, her little hands patting his shoulders in excitement as she spotted the colorful rows of flowers. She'd grown so much, talking in short sentences now, her curls bouncing as she moved, her mother's eyes bright with curiosity about everything around her. "Ready for our gardening class, sweetheart?" Eli asked, reaching back to touch her foot. She squealed in response, clapping her hands together, making him laugh. The sound carried across the garden, drawing smiles from the early morning joggers who had made this route part of their daily ritual. A group of children from the local elementary school began arriving with their parents, chattering excitedly about what they might plant today. Most wore oversized gardening gloves that swallowed their small hands and carried little plastic watering cans decorated with rainbow stickers and cartoon vegetables. They gathered around Eli like eager ducklings, some waving shyly at Maggie, who had become the unofficial mascot of Clara's cupboard. The youngest ones couldn't pronounce her name properly, calling her Magpie instead, a nickname that had stuck throughout the whole community. "Good morning, everyone," Eli called out, his voice warm and steady. The morning light caught the laugh lines around his eyes, evidence of how much his life had changed. "Who's ready to learn about growing things?" Me. A chorus of young voices rang out, hands shooting up in the air like wildflowers reaching for the sundae. Eli led them to a freshly prepared bed where colorful seed packets and child-sized trowels waited in neat rows. He knelt down in the soft earth, his work boots already dusty from the morning preparations, helping a small girl with pigtails adjust her oversized gloves. "Now, who remembers what we need to make seeds grow?" "Dirt," shouted one boy with freckles scattered across his nose, holding up a handful of soil like a treasure. "Water," added a girl in a pink sundress, swinging her tiny watering can. "Sunshine," a third called out, pointing toward the golden rays filtering through the maple trees. "That's right," Eli nodded, pulling Maggie around to sit in his lap as he demonstrated the day's lesson. Her small fingers immediately reached for the soil, fascinated by its texture. "But there's something else too, something Miss Clara taught me." He picked up a handful of soil, letting it sift through his fingers like time itself. "We need to tend them with kindness. Good things grow when you water them with kindness." The children watched intently as he showed them how to make small holes in the soil, their faces serious with concentration that only children could muster for something they truly cared about. Some of these kids came from families that once relied on the food bank themselves. Now they were learning to grow food for others, understanding in their simple way that helping was a circle that came back around. Behind them, the screen door creaked open with its familiar groan, a sound that had become as much a part of Saturday mornings as the church bells. Daniel stepped out onto the newly reinforced porch, clipboard in hand, looking more at home in his worn jeans and faded polo shirt than he ever had in his expensive Chicago suits. His hair was grayer now, but his shoulders seemed lighter somehow. He paused to watch the garden class, a soft smile playing at his lips as he observed his unlikely business partner teaching the next generation about growth and grace. Throughout the morning, Eli guided little hands in planting tomatoes, bell peppers, zucchini, and marigolds. He showed them how deep to plant each seed, how to cover them gently like tucking a baby into bed, how to water without flooding the tiny homes they'd created. Maggie helped by dropping handfuls of soil on his shoes, giggling each time the dirt scattered across his laces. Her laughter mixed with the children's voices, creating a symphony of joy that seemed to make the plants themselves stretch a little taller. "Remember," he said, helping a shy boy with thick glasses pat soil over his tomato seeds, "every plant starts small, just like Miss Clara's kindness started with one simple act in a grocery store. But look how it grew." He gestured around the garden, where volunteers were already beginning their morning routines, checking the irrigation system and harvesting vegetables for the afternoon distribution. The garden itself was proof of that growth. What began as a memorial project had blossomed into something bigger, a teaching space where children learned about nature, a gathering place where neighbors became friends, a source of fresh produce that fed hundreds of families each month. Local master gardeners volunteered their time on weekends, teaching canning classes in the summer and preservation techniques in the fall. School groups came for science lessons about soil and photosynthesis. Elderly residents found new purpose tending the flower beds, their weathered hands still capable of nurturing life. As the morning progressed, more community members arrived, carrying thermos bottles of coffee and paper bags of homemade muffins that filled the air with the scent of cinnamon and blueberries. They settled on the wooden benches that lined the gravel paths, chatting about the week's events and enjoying the spring warmth on their faces. Mrs. Peterson, now a regular volunteer who had traded her suspicious frowns for genuine smiles, set up the coffee station on the porch like she did every Saturday morning. Her famous oatmeal raisin cookies appeared in a basket covered with one of Clara's old tea towels. Around 10 o'clock, the church bells began their melodic chiming, calling the faithful to worship and blessing everyone else with their ancient song. Daniel walked over to where Eli was helping the children clean up their tools, showing them how to brush the soil off the trowels and hang them on the pegboard Daniel had installed last month. "Just got the monthly numbers from the main office," he said, his voice carrying quiet pride mixed with amazement. "We've officially helped 5,000 families since we started." 5,000, Eli. Can you believe that? The children might not have understood the significance of that number, but the adults nearby certainly did. 5,000 families meant 20,000 people or more. It meant children who went to bed with full bellies, parents who didn't have to choose between medicine and groceries, elderly folks who could afford both food and heat. Mrs. Peterson wiped her eyes with her flowered apron, remembering her own difficult months before she started volunteering. Someone started clapping, and soon everyone joined in, the sound echoing off the garden walls like gentle thunder. Eli stood slowly, overwhelmed by emotion, as he always was when confronted with the magnitude of what they built together. He remembered standing in that grocery store checkout line, holding his last few crumpled dollars, desperate to feed his daughter and too proud to ask for help. Now they were feeding thousands every month. Clara's legacy had multiplied beyond anything they could have imagined when she first whispered those words that changed everything. As the garden class wrapped up, parents collected their children, many stopping to sign up for next week's session on the clipboard Daniel held. Little voices promised to water their seeds at home and bring pictures of their progress. Daniel headed inside to start preparing for the afternoon food distribution, checking off items on his ever-present list. The garden settled into a peaceful lull, broken only by birdsong and the distant church bells calling people to worship. Eli lifted Maggie from the carrier, her little legs kicking happily as he settled her on his hip. She babbled about the flows and dirt, pointing at everything with the enthusiasm only toddlers could muster. Together, they walked to the porch swing, the same one where Clara had spent countless hours watching over her beloved community, where she'd shared stories and wisdom with anyone who needed to hear them. The chains creaked softly as they sat down, a sound as familiar now as Maggie's laughter, as comforting as coming home. The swing swayed gently as Eli held his daughter close, her warm weight against his chest, a reminder of all the reasons he kept going. From here, he could see the entire garden stretching out before them, the food bank entrance with its hand-painted sign welcoming all who needed help, and the steady stream of volunteers arriving for their Saturday shifts. Through the window behind them, Clara's portrait caught the morning light, her kind eyes and gentle smile watching over it all like a guardian angel who had never really left. Eli pressed a kiss to Maggie's curls, breathing in her baby scent mixed with garden soil and spring air. His heart felt full of gratitude and peace, emotions that had once seemed impossible in the darkest days after Hannah's death. "We're home, baby girl," he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "We're finally home." What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Matthews, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.